Chapter 766. Prince Changqin glanced at Wu Qi, then nodded with a smile and said, "Although we have a 90% chance of success, there are still risks. It's not right to ask you to take this risk for no reason. You have the Supreme Tower, so it goes without saying that you can attack and defend at the same time. The true body of heaven and earth scripture is already one of the best body tempering techniques in the universe, and the dragon kill can be used in both melee and long-range attacks." In a pitch-black great hall on a great mountain in the depths of the ghost realm, 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 400 ghost saints were sitting cross-legged on a group of black stone pillars of different heights. When Wu Qi was sucked into the mirror of Kunlun, several great heavenly ghost kings suddenly opened their eyes and let out deep hisses. This was the teleportation formation in the Antarctic Xianbing. As long as Wu Qi followed the information from the mirror of Kunlun and changed the coordinates of the formation to one of the 13 corresponding coordinates on Pangu continent, he would be able to return to Pangu continent without a hitch. Amidst the laughter of the ghosts, the faces of the 3 Buddhas sitting on 3 glowing lotus thrones in the void outside the ghost realm turned extremely unsightly. They stared blankly at the ghost realm shrouded in thick clouds of dark mist, their benevolent and dignified faces filled with ugly, awkward smiles. A faint beam of light flashed in the distance and then disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, 3 huge golden palms were hovering in front of the 3 Buddhas. The index finger of one of the palms was broken by something, emitting a faint golden glow. His divine sense had locked onto the small planet, and the information that followed made Wu Qi understand that there were originally 7 teleportation formations on this planet, but 2 of them were destroyed 1,000 years ago, and 1 more than a decade ago. Now, only 4 of them remained intact. Darkeen Celestial Tower was a treasure that Wu Qi had nourished with his natal energy, so he naturally could not use it to fight the enemy. The blood centipede sword was used to kill, and once unleashed, it would cause blood to flow for thousands of miles. Although it was powerful, its killing intent was too strong. Only the worldly phenomenon tablet contained boundless profundities. It could be used to kill, trap, attack, and defend. Once used properly, it was much stronger than other treasures. With a casual wave of his hand, a square-shaped jade medallion flew out of his hand and fell into Wu Qi's hand along with wisps of spiritual light. He shouted in a low voice, "Martial Uncle, I'm back." Wu Qi realized that the teleportation formation that was destroyed 1,000 years ago should be the one that brought him to Pangu continent, not to mention the one that was destroyed a dozen years ago. Of the remaining 4 teleportation formations, 2 were located near the North and South Poles, 1 was located in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, and the last one was located in the Earth-Fire-Poison Cave at the center of Mount Amei. He glanced at Prince Changqin and knew that he had activated some mysterious function of the Mirror of Kunlun, using this mysterious power that contained a very strong innate aura to purify his divine soul. Judging by the prince's flushed face as he performed a hand incantation gesture with both hands, he knew that it was a great burden on him to activate this power. Even so, Wu Qi's divine soul trembled violently as the information was rapidly injected into it. He felt waves of pain in his divine soul, and cold sweat broke out all over Wu Qi's body as he almost screamed in pain. Just then, a beam of silver light sprinkled down from the mirror of Kunlun and gently enveloped Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi, whose divine soul was almost unable to withstand the impact, felt a refreshing coolness all over his body as an unfathomable and mysterious power penetrated into his divine soul. Instinctively, Wu Qi noticed that his divine soul had become more pliable and strong, and the pain had vanished without a trace. Prince Changqin was sweating profusely as he staggered back a few steps and retracted his hand incantation gesture while trembling all over. Looking at the mirror of Kunlun, which had gradually calmed down, he murmured in a low voice, "Marquis of East Sea, I hope you're safe and sound." With a thought in his mind, Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to Changqin, then injected his divine will into the endless whirlpool of starlight in the mirror of Kunlun. Wu Qi's body was shrouded in a silvery light, and a tremendous suction force rushed out of the mirror of Kunlun. Wu Qi's body turned into a very fine beam of silver light and plunged into the mirror, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Plumes of smoke and clouds billowed out of the mirror of Kunlun, while countless star maps spun rapidly and transformed into a whirlpool of starlight that rumbled and rumbled in front of Wu Qi. As soon as Wu Qi sent a wisp of divine will into the star map, the situation of the 840 million mortal worlds mastered by Prince Chang Qin immediately rushed into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean like a tide. If it had not been for the fact that Wu Qi had formed an innate chaotic divine soul and his divine will had been strengthened several times, the influx of information alone would have crushed his divine soul. A clear divine will was sent into Wu Qi's divine will, and he instantly understood the origin and usage of the jade medallion. Today, the island was heavily guarded, and burly men in uniforms and armed to the teeth could be seen patrolling among the greenery. Small vehicles of strange shapes dragged mobile missile launchers back and forth, while several radar antennas were erected on the mountaintop in the middle of the island. Wu Qi, who had transformed into a beam of silver light, first felt his body become heavy, and a great suction force came from all directions. But, he sped up abruptly, and the suction force was easily thrown to the back of his mind. Then, a great sheet of golden light came crashing down from above, and a terrible pressure nearly crushed Wu Qi, who had transformed into a beam of silver light. Fortunately, the silver light wrapped around him suddenly lit up, and in the blink of an eye, he tore through the golden light and sped forward. Keeping Chang Qin's kindness in mind, Wu Qi's divine soul became many times more lively and active than usual under the illumination of the silver light. He easily found the information of the earth where he was born among the information of these mortal worlds, and was delighted to find that there were still 4 places on this earth that were still glowing with red light, for spatial teleportation formations were still intact. But before long, a ghost king suddenly laughed and said, "If he is not going to Panga continent, why are we wasting the effort to stop him? Don't you see that even those 3 ghost kings failed to stop him? Why are we wasting the effort?" Wu Qi chuckled and casually thrust his palm out, vanishing the black door in front of him in an instant. It was still the same antique building with green tiles and green bricks. On the plaque hanging over the lintel of the door were 5 dazzling golden characters on a black background, "Underhand Sect." The 5 flamboyant characters were so arrogant, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, that they looked like 5 evil dragons coiling on the plaque. Although Chang Qin had given such an important treasure to Wu Qi as a reward for Wu Qi's help in delivering the letters, Wu Qi owed Chang Qin too much, so he had no choice but to desperately deliver the 2 letters to Emperor Xianyuan and Emperor Haozuan. As a direct descendant of Emperor Xuanqiu, the natural phenomena medallion was used by Chang Qin to protect him when he was young. With his formidable cultivation base and the mirror of Kunlun guarding Kunlun Heavenly Pass, the natural phenomena medallion was of no use to him. But for Wu Qi, it was an extraordinary treasure. Chang Qin walked slowly out of the great hall and looked up at the faint dark clouds and mist that shrouded Mount Kunlun. His long eyebrows twitched slightly as he cried out in a low voice, "Someone, deliver my order. Strike the thunder drums 30,000 times and drive away all the spies in the vicinity." Wu Qi's face flickered. With a sway of his body, he was already in front of the gate of the Underhand Sect's headquarters. But Wu Qi was not in a hurry to strike. Instead, he scanned the whole planet with his divine sense, then vanished without a trace. "Crown Prince, Tan Lang is ready." The current island did not look like the headquarters of a Jianghu sect at all. It was clearly a heavily guarded military base. In just a few seconds, the silver starlight around him suddenly disappeared, and Wu Qi felt a faint chill coming at him from all directions. In the next moment, he found himself in a thick blue xianbing. It was a circular cave thousands of feet in diameter. A teleportation formation made up of hundreds of giant jade tablets was hovering in the middle of the cave, all of them gleaming faintly. Before long, a deafening rumble that sounded like hundreds of thousands of thunderbolts bursting out at the same time rang out from within Mount Kunlun. The sound waves swept out in all directions, accompanied by ear-piercing screams. Countless dark shadows rushed out of the air around Mount Kunlun, fleeing in all directions with their hands covering their ears. After branding the various incantations of controlling the natural phenomena medallion in the depths of his divine soul, Wu Qi flipped his hand and put the medallion back into his body, then bowed respectfully to Prince Chang Qin. Although the natural phenomena medallion was an artifact crafted by Emperor Xuanqiu, the materials it was made of were extremely rare innate spirit items, whose quality was not inferior to Wu Qi's blood centipede sword. It was also an innate spirit artifact. After a long while, one of the Buddhas in the center cried out in a low voice, "Order all the guardians in the mortal worlds to kill this man. We must not let him return to Pangu continent through the mortal worlds." This was the natural phenomena medallion, personally crafted by Emperor Xuanqiu, one of the ancient emperors. It contained infinite mysteries, and had the great power to contain the universe and evolve the primordial era. It was one of the secret treasures inherited by the human race, and could only be activated by Pangu's sacred energy. If an immortal dared to inject his immortal energy into it, the only outcome would be being turned into ashes by the backlash. Wu Qi could not help but sigh in his heart that Prince Chang Qin was a kind man, so kind that Wu Qi felt a little embarrassed. This was the earth where Wu Qi was born. After pondering for a moment, Prince Chang Qin smiled and said, "Well, here's a little toy for you to protect yourself with." The jade medallion was 1 foot and 8 inches long, 6 and 3 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. The white medallion was carved with countless images of earth, water, fire, wind, rain, thunder, and even the sun, the moon, and the stars. At first glance, the medallion was crystal clear and glittering, as if all the images were flowing. The natural phenomena engraved on the medallion were so real that even with Wu Qi's mighty divine sense, he could not tell how many things were engraved on the tiny medallion. Wu Qi produced the Dark Yin celestial tower and swallowed the jade armor Dark Turtle flying ship, which carried Huang Liang and the others, into it. In fact, he had moved the ship into his interstitial world, and knocked out Huang Liang and the others with a mental shock. After opening his mouth and breathing out a plume of purple smoke to swallow the pitch-black Dark Yin celestial tower, Wu Qi turned to look at Prince Chang Qin. The natural phenomena medallion contained all kinds of celestial phenomena in the universe. As long as one's cultivation base was high enough, one could conjure all kinds of powerful forces of heaven and earth from the medallion to attack the enemy or defend oneself. When one's cultivation base reached a very profound level, this natural phenomena medallion could conjure a void of its own, and naturally lay down the natural phenomena formation, which could trap or kill with just a thought. When the light faded, Wu Qi appeared over a small island in Indonesia. This was where the headquarters of the Underhand sect was located, and where Wu Qi spent his childhood and youth. It was a place that left a deep impression on him, and was equivalent to home in his heart. Chapter 767. When he was in the ice cave in the South Pole, Wu Qi scanned the earth with his divine sense and was surprised to find out that the man in charge of the Underhand sect's headquarters was none other than his archenemy, Shengguanyi. The Underhand sect no longer had the same goal as before. Under Shengguanye's leadership, they had become an underground ruler who secretly controlled the entire Nanyang region. What surprised Wu Qi the most was that Shengguanye's cultivation had reached the core formation realm, and he was only one step away from forming the golden core. When Wu Qi's divine sense locked onto Shengguanyi, he was indulging in debauchery in the Underhand sect's headquarters, having sex with a few beautiful girls with skin whiter than snow. After smashing the main entrance of the Underhand sect's headquarters with a single palm strike, the alarm immediately rang, and countless heavily armed men rushed over from all directions. A sharp rebuke was heard coming from the loudspeakers erected on the high ground. In the airfield behind a few hills in the distance, dozens of armed helicopters with streamlined bodies were taking off at top speed, flying straight towards Wu Qi. Along with the sound of gun bolts being pulled, nearly 1,000 men surrounded Wu Qi. More than 50 military helicopters were circling above him in the sky, with all kinds of anti-ground missiles hanging on their wings glinting faintly under the sunlight. Wu Qi looked at the helicopters as if nothing had happened. The maximum power of these missiles was only equivalent to the full power of a core formation cultivator, and to him, it was not even enough to scratch an itch. Even the strongest thermonuclear weapon on Earth, the hydrogen bomb, which weighed tens of millions of tons, was only equivalent to the full power of a 36th-tier heaven immortal. This was the limit of power that humans in the mortal world could possess. How could Wu Qi take these weapons seriously? The mortal world was created by the ancient Buddhas and primordial immortals using the bodies of fallen ancient fiend gods and some natural treasures. It was a tool for them to raise humans. Humans in the mortal world could not possess too much power, and the thermonuclear weapon was the most extreme power they could possess. As if nothing had happened, Wu Qi glanced at those men who were on high alert, then sighed and said, "Shangguanyi, are you still not coming out?" A deep laughter could be heard coming from afar. Shangguanyi, who was calm and composed, had put on a set of black training clothes, and was surrounded by dozens of middle-aged men as he swaggered out. Shangguanyi, who was staring at the sky, let out a cold and arrogant laugh and said, "Since you're able to sneak into this place and destroy the main entrance of my underhand sect, I can see that you're quite capable. Unfortunately, these abilities are not enough. I'll give you two options." Snorting coldly, Shangguanyi stretched out 2 fingers and said, "1. Submit to me obediently, and you'll be able to enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future. As for the last one, kill yourself so that you don't fall into my hands and suffer the endless torture." Wu Qi sighed, shook his head, and returned to his original appearance. It had been nearly 20 years, but Wu Qi's appearance hadn't changed much. Apart from his aura and temperament that had matured a lot, his face was still the same as before. The passage of time did not leave any trace on his face. For someone like him who had the cultivation base of a golden immortal, time was powerless against him. Wu Qi, who was wearing the Deyu uniform, had his hands clasped behind his back. His long hair was gently fluttering in the sea breeze behind his back. He squinted at Shangguanyi and sighed, "Shangguanyi, do you still remember me? How did you survive the Machu Picchu explosion back then?" Shangguanyi stared blankly at Wu Qi, who had returned to his original appearance. He kept blinking his eyes, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. At the same time, he was trying to recall who this face belonged to. After a quarter of an hour, he finally asked hesitantly, Is it Wu Qi? You're still alive, you son of a bitch? How could you still be alive?" All of a sudden, Shangguanyi roared hysterically. He pointed at Wu Qi and yelled, "How could you still be alive?" In the past, the Lord of Tao used the talisman given by the immortals to travel back in time. Only then was he able to reform our bodies and souls, even though we had been destroyed by the explosion. You're just 3 mortals, and you were dragged into the grand universal teleportation formation. How could you still be alive? With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi stared at Shangguanyi coldly. He waited for him to calm down, then said indifferently, "Master and Xiaobai, they're dead. Their souls have merged with mine, and will never be separated again in this life. I thought I'd never have the chance to see you again, but the heavens have eyes, and I'm finally back." The strange atmosphere between Wu Qi and Shangguanyi made all the armed men in the surroundings tense up. Wu Qi's strange tone made a few of the men who had their guns pointed at Wu Qi cramp their fingers, and they immediately pulled the trigger. When the gunshots rang out, over 1,000 men who were aiming at Wu Qi pulled the triggers at the same time, sending countless bullets whistling towards Wu Qi. Shangguanyi had a hideous smile on his face, but his smile turned into extreme shock in the blink of an eye. A circle of faint black flame burst out from Wu Qi's body, and all the bullets that got close to him were devoured and corroded by the black flame. Not a single bullet could get close to his body. The helicopters in the sky had also unleashed 36 waves of missiles, and over 50 of them had unleashed over 1,000 air-to-ground missiles at the same time. Raging flames and smoke blanketed Wu Qi's body, and the scorching flames converged into a blinding white light that enveloped him. But the purgatory demonic flame around Wu Qi's body started rolling, and all the flames and shrapnel were devoured and melted by the black flame. Even the sound of the missiles exploding was devoured by the black flame. The sound of more than 1,000 air-to-ground missiles exploding was actually about the same as the sound of firecrackers. The situation on the battlefield was simply extremely strange. Lightly clapping his palms, Wu Qi said coldly, "So many years have passed, and the arms of those black market traffickers have not improved at all? Hee, I can't blame you, as how could those animals that were raised in captivity give you so much improvement? Not bad, the power of these missiles is slightly stronger than a full-force attack from a core condensation cultivator. Not bad. Shang Guanye's eyeballs almost popped out from his eye sockets. He looked at Wu Qi in horror, and subconsciously took a dozen steps back. Everyone on the scene backed off in panic, because they saw something unbelievable. After being shot by thousands of missiles, not only did Wu Qi not suffer any injuries, even the ground around him was not affected by the explosions. It was as if the black flame around him was a bottomless black hole that devoured all the explosive power and shrapnel. Amidst the hurried cries of alarm, the fiend flame of purgatory around Wu Qi transformed into tens of thousands of spirit snakes and shot out. They tore through the air with shrill whistling noises and hit the bodies of the armed men, burning them into balls of pitch-black flame. The blazing fireballs flew everywhere, and heart-wrenching screams could be heard from every corner of the island. Under the scanning of Wu Qi's powerful divine sense, nothing that happened in the underground bases deep within the island could escape Wu Qi's eyes. Countless snakes formed by the black flames pierced through the thick rock layers of the island and burned into the underground bases below. The armed men who were busy working near the submarines and small warships were screaming in fear. The flames were burning fiercely, and not long after that, a loud explosion could be heard from the bottom of the island. It was the sound of the ammunition and fuel stored deep within the island being detonated. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of armed men on the island were killed by Wu Qi. Only Shang Guanyi and the dozens of middle-aged men behind him were left. Wu Qi gently patted on Ao Buzan's shoulder. Ao Buzan, who had long lost control of his killing intent, let out a deep dragon roar. He suddenly transformed into a giant black dragon that was hundreds of feet long, opened his mouth and swallowed a middle-aged man beside Shang Guanyi. Along with the sound of chewing, a large amount of blood flowed down from the corner of Ao Buzan's mouth. He squinted his eyes and stared at Shang Guanyi, chuckled and said, "Hee hee, Lao Tzu would never have thought that my lord was actually born in the mortal world." Wu Qi patted Ao Buzan's slightly protruding belly, then smiled at Shang Guanyi and the others, who were dumbfounded, and said, "If I may ask, where did all the elders and fellow disciples of the underhand sect go?" Shang Guanyi's body was trembling. He said with a trembling voice, all dead." Wu Qi furrowed his brows and asked in a deep voice, "All dead?" A middle-aged man beside Shang Guanyi suddenly knelt on the ground and screamed. This was all done by sect leader Shangguan. He said that those elders and disciples didn't help him when he was in trouble, so he asked Miao Yuan to kill them all. "This has nothing to do with us." Wu Qi's unfathomable methods, as well as the sudden appearance of the legendary real dragon, had scared Shang Guanyi and the others so much that their minds went blank. Without Wu Qi asking, they told him everything in detail. All in all, the underhand sect today was no longer the underhand sect that Wu Qi was familiar with. All the disciples that Wu Qi was familiar with had been killed in Shang Guanyi's Great Purge. The current underhand sect had become a tool for Miao Yuan to control the South Sea, and to plunder all kinds of natural treasures. It had become a tool to serve his own personal interests, and it no longer had the original purpose of the underhand sect. Wu Qi lowered his head and pondered for a moment, then shook his head. He casually waved his hand towards the underhand sect's main altar. Along with an ear-piercing sound, a tattered wooden plaque flew out from the altar. This was the ancestral plaque of the underhand sect. After Shang Guanyi had purged the entire sect, this ancestral white wooden plaque was thrown away in the storeroom to gather dust, and was replaced by this huge golden plaque. Gently rubbing the wooden plaque that had accompanied the underhand sect for many years, Wu Qi said in an indifferent tone, "Uncle Master Shangguan, I've rebuilt the underhand sect on Panga continent. Once I've massacred Green City, I'll bring this plaque to Panga continent and place it at the entrance of the underhand sect I've built." With a relaxed smile, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "The descendants of the underhand sect will not die, but you will die." Shang Guanyi was startled. He roared and retreated at top speed, but how could Wu Qi let him escape? The blood centipede sword tore through the air with a sharp whistling sound. A beam of blood-red light swept out, cutting Shang Guanyi and the people around him in half at the waist. All the hills and forests on the island were broken and shattered by the sword's ferocious sword energy. He casually struck down, unleashing a bolt of thunder that turned the entire island into ashes and sank to the bottom of the ocean. With a sway of his body, Wuqi had crossed thousands of miles in the blink of an eye and arrived above Green City. Taoist Miao Yuan, an old friend has come to visit. Why aren't you coming to see me? Wuqi patted his battle robe and changed it into an ordinary Taoist robe, while he stuffed Ao Buzan and the dragon python sisters into his sleeve. A deep bell toll rang out from the deep valley behind Green City, and a dozen white sword beams cut through the clouds and approached. Chapter 768. The leading white sword beam moved nimbly like a snake, gliding lightly over the thin layer of clouds and approaching Wuqi. A young Taoist amidst the sword beam cried out, "May I ask which fellow Taoist has come to visit us? What business do you have with Uncle Master Miao Yuan?" A blood-red gleam flashed across Wuqi's eyes as he stared at the approaching sword beam. Incense smoke drifted in the air in front of Mount Qingcheng. Countless believers were shuttling back and forth between the Taoist temples and monasteries. Taoists and monks, both real and fake, were selling all kinds of talismans and ornaments to pilgrims, believers, pedestrians, and tourists, while some rich people were offering generous incense money in the Great Hall. It was a scene of prosperity and peace. But behind Mount Qingcheng, a faint killing intent lingered between heaven and earth. Wuqi's killing intent had enveloped the entire back of the mountain. Narrowing his eyes at the dozens of incoming sword beams, he sighed and said in a low voice, "I'm here to kill, not to make friends with you. I've found you, Taoist Miao Yuan." With a casual wave, the blood centipede sword turned into numerous blood threads and fell from the sky, which transformed into a large net of light that wrapped around the dozen white sword beams. As Wuqi's mind turned inward, the sword beams shattered, and the Taoists in the sword beams let out cries of horror and despair. Countless pieces of flesh and bones, no more than an inch in circumference, sprayed out along with a great deal of blood. The Taoists' souls were torn to pieces by the blood centipede sword. "Why don't you come out and see me, Taoist Miao Yuan? Ha, you actually have an immortal talisman bestowed by an immortal? An immortal talisman that can trace back time? You are really lucky." Wuqi laughed in a deep voice. His laughter was not loud, but it easily spread through all the caves and blessed lands in the back of the mountain, as well as all the Taoist temples hidden in the rocks, streams, and valleys. A deep bell chime rang out, and from the peaks of many peaks in the back mountain of Qingcheng, plumes of clouds rose high into the sky, transforming into a dense cloud barrier that enveloped the entire back mountain in the blink of an eye. Colorful Buddha light and immortal light were swirling above the cloud barrier. On the cliffs of the front mountain of Qing City, countless tourists were exclaiming at the same time. They took out all kinds of cameras and other things to take pictures of the rare scene. They had no idea of the terrible killing intent hidden in the magnificent scene, or the great danger lurking behind the light. Wuqi floated in midair, not moving at all, allowing the mountain guarding formation at the back of Qingcheng Mountain to pull him in. Spirit light flowed ceaselessly in the depths of the white clouds. The clouds around Wuqi tumbled and rolled, dragging him into the most powerful formation gate of the defensive formation in the back mountain of Qing City. White clouds coiled around the mountain, and only a dozen lofty peaks could be vaguely seen. Each peak was filled with Taoists in green robes and monks in yellow or red kasayas. Obviously, the Taoists in the back mountain of Qing City made up the majority. Among every 10 Taoists, there was only one Taoist. After all, Qing City was a holy land for Taoist League, and most of the cultivators living in seclusion in the back mountain were Taoists. The cloud that blotted the sky condensed into several dozens of huge cloud flags around Wuqi. When the flags fluttered, a tremendous force came out of them, restraining Wuqi's body, while a large sheet of spirit light transformed into countless flying swords, wheeling and wheeling around him. The flying swords formed from these spiritual lights were extremely cold and sharp, and they were no different from treasured swords forged from metal. Apart from the flags and the flying swords that could take lives, there was also a large patch of dark clouds hovering above Wuqi's head, in which bolts of lightning could be vaguely seen gathering. Beneath his feet was a large patch of red cloud, from which blazing flames shot into the sky. The red flame contained wisps of poison, which was the poisonous flame of the earth drawn from the depths of an underground cave. Wu Qi nodded his head inwardly, thinking that this was a pretty good formation. It had the means to imprison people, the murderous intent of the flying swords, and the heavenly lightning and earthly fire to prevent people from escaping. If there was a powerful magical artifact guarding the eye of the formation, no heaven immortal below the 30th tier would be able to escape, and even if a mid-tier heaven immortal could break it, it would take him some effort. However, in front of Wu Qi, who was an expert in all kinds of formations, the defensive formation in the back mountain of Qing City was really not strong enough. His divine sense swept across the vast back mountain of Qing City, locking onto all the Taoists and monks, as well as the cultivators who were cultivating in seclusion in the cave abodes and secret caves. Wu Qi did not want to waste time talking to these cultivators. The blood centipede sword had already transformed into countless blood threads and shot out into the air. Each of the blood threads was several miles long and more than 100 times thinner than a strand of hair. The blood threads leaped up and down like the wind, easily tearing through cloud flags, flying swords, and even mountains in their path. The cultivators who were looking at Wu Qi from the mountains near and far were horrified. One by one, they summoned their flying swords and magical artifacts to meet the blood threads pressing down on them. But the blood centipede sword was an innate spirit artifact, and it was extremely powerful. How could these acquired magical artifacts resist it? The flying swords and magical artifacts were shattered, and the bodies and souls of the monks and Taoists were shattered as well. These cultivators from the back mountain of Qing City only had 3 to 5 inferior-grade magical artifacts, so they were no match for the blood centipede sword. From the moment Wu Qi threw out the blood centipede sword to the moment he killed all the cultivators around him, it had taken him no more than a deep breath. The strongest among the thousands of cultivators were peak-level nascent soul cultivators, and the weakest were only at the early stage of the Khanate realm. They had thought they would be able to see a good show of exorcism, but little did they expect that Wu Qi, the fiend, would easily send them all to their souls. A furious roar came from the mountainside of a distant mountain. Namo Amitba! How dare you, evil creature! Wu Qi laughed and cried out in a deep voice, Namo Amitba! Which Buddha is that? Amitba. He, is that one of the incarnations of Lord Buddha in the mortal world? As he roared, Wu Qi pointed a finger out. Countless blood threads merged into one, transforming into a blood-red centipede that was several miles long and covered in bright scales. Then, it shot toward the mountain. With a flash of blood, the mountain was torn to pieces by the centipede's sharp claws and fangs. 3 red-robed old monks, who had just transformed into a beam of Buddhist light and flew up from the mountainside with their relics on top of their heads, howled miserably. Their bodies were devoured by the centipede, and the relics on top of their heads were about to fly away, but they were also smashed to pieces by a few beams of blood. Their flesh and energy essence were forcibly absorbed by the blood centipede sword, turning into tiny specks of dust that drifted down from the sky. Cries of alarm came from the distant horizon. In that direction were 7 old Taoists in lavender Taoist robes, whom Wu Qi had long since locked onto with his divine sense. Like the 3 old monks who had flown out, these 7 old Taoists were all in the realm of nascent divinity. In a mortal world like Earth, which was specially used to raise humans, the realm of nascent divinity was already the strongest cultivation base a cultivator could possess. These cultivators who were taken to the Tao League and the Buddhist League were all very talented, or perhaps they were devout believers in their previous lives. That was why they had the fortune to set foot on the path of cultivation in this life. When they cultivated to the peak stage of the nascent divinity realm, they would face their first heavenly tribulation as heaven immortals. Once they successfully passed the tribulation, they would leave the mortal world and ascend to the celestial court or the pure land of the Buddhist League. This kind of ascension was the kind of ascension that the people in the mortal world were familiar with. All the cultivators who had transcended the heavenly tribulation would be forcibly taken to the celestial court or the pure land of the Buddhist League, where they would become the immortal officials of the celestial court and the guardians of the Buddhist League. The itinerant cultivators in the outer heavenly realms still had a choice. They could choose whether to serve the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, but the cultivators in the mortal world did not even have the chance to choose. They had to become low-grade existences under the command of the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League. Wu Qi snorted coldly and pointed a finger out. The blood centipede sword turned into a blood-red beam and shot whistling through the air, slashing toward the 7 old Taoists. The 7 old Taoists snorted coldly in unison. With a wave of their hands, a dozen dazzling magical treasures flew up and flew toward the blood centipede sword. The grade of these magical treasures was very good. 90% of them were upper-grade magical treasures, and 3 of them were lower-grade spirit artifacts. But the blood centipede sword was an innate spirit artifact that surpassed gold immortal artifacts, and could fight against primordial artifacts. With a gentle twist of the blood-red beam, the dozen magical treasures were crushed to pieces. With a thought in Wu Qi's mind, the blood-red beam circled around the 7 old Taoists and cut their fleshly bodies in two. The 7 old Taoists cried out in pain as their foreheads exploded, and their bloody nascent divinities were about to flee with mystic arts. But when facing Wu Qi, a gold immortal, these nascent divinity cultivators were like paralyzed toddlers trying to escape from a black hole. It was simply impossible. Wu Qi clenched his fist, and the void suddenly closed inwardly. A tremendous pressure came crashing down, and the old Taoists' nascent divinities were crushed to pieces by the collapsing space before they could even let out a scream. "Why aren't you coming out to see me, Taoist Miao Yun? How long are you going to hide in that underground cave?" Wu Qi's soft cry turned into a thunderclap and exploded in the ears of Taoist Miao Yun, who was hiding under a mountain. The deafening sound shook him so much that blood spurted out of his 7 orifices and he shrieked miserably. At the same time, the mountain above him exploded into countless pieces of rubble that sprayed in all directions, revealing the underground cave where Taoist Miao Yun had been cultivating in seclusion. Clutching his ears with both hands, Taoist Miao Yun fell to the ground and twitched. Suddenly, a spirit talisman floated up from his body. The talisman, stained with his blood, flickered and burned in the wind, then turned into a jade rui scepter and flew straight up into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Before Wu Qi could react, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky, and a colorful aurora suddenly appeared over Mount Green City. The aurora, which could only appear in the polar regions, had actually appeared over Mount Green City. Countless tourists in the front of the mountain burst into loud cheers. The aurora was magnificent and ever-changing, and the colorful glow enveloped the back of Mount Green City in an instant. A bright light, invisible to the naked eyes of mortals, flashed in the aurora, and 3 immortals clad in dark purple Taoist robes rushed out of it. "How dare you intrude into the mortal world and stir up trouble? The immortal monarch has given the order that you will die today." The 3 immortals, who were at the peak of the first tier of heaven immortal realm and only 1 step away from becoming a gold immortal, raised their hands. 3 crimson flying swords shrouded in raging flames transformed into 10 miles long fiery dragons that slashed down towards Wu Qi's head. A deep Buddhist chant rang out as 3 arhats strode out of another bright light and cried out in a deep voice, "By the decree of the Bodhisattva of wisdom and wisdom, Miaoing, Miaoing, wisdom and wisdom of the world. What are you waiting for?" The 3 arhats raised their hands as well. 3 Vajra scepters transformed into a Vajra pagoda that stood 10 miles tall and smashed down towards Wu Qi. The flying swords and the pagoda glowed brilliantly as a mighty pressure swept out in all directions, causing the peaks of the back of Mount Green City to crumble. How could the mountains of the mortal world withstand the destructive aura of peak-level heaven immortals and golden arhats? Wu Qi grinned and gently stamped his foot. An invisible force pierced through the ground and killed the howling Taoist Miao Yuan and all the cultivators in the back of Mount Green City. The 3 heaven immortals and 3 arhats who descended from the mortal world flew into a rage. They shook their weapons and charged at Wu Qi with all their might. Chapter 769. 3 peak-level heaven immortals. 3 peak-level arhats. 3 flaming flying swords. 3 golden pagodas. A golden light towered into the sky. Wu Qi smiled as he looked at the tide-like attacks coming at him from the golden light. With hands clasped behind his back, his eyes shone brightly as he fixed his eyes on the 3 golden arhats who were swooping down at him. Shrouded in the 9th heaven Bingding pure yang true flame, the flying swords that could melt gold and iron and destroy all evils, the flying swords hacked heavily at Wuqi's head. Amidst the jarring sound of collision, not even a single strand of Wuqi's hair was broken. On the contrary, fist-sized nicks were left on the 3 flying swords by his head, and cracks as dense as spider webs covered the dazzling bodies of the swords. The 3 swords forged by the Grandmaster craftsmen of the Celestial Court were shattered, and the 3 heaven immortals, who were performing incantation gestures and chanting spells to attack Wuqi with immortal spells, coughed up blood and retreated. The immortal swords they cultivated with their lives were destroyed, and their nascent divinities were shaken as well. The powerful immortal spells they had been preparing to unleash suddenly lost control and backfired. It was as if they had been struck head-on by the immortal spells they had unleashed with all their strength, and the impact had left cracks in their internal organs. Amidst the cries of alarm, the golden pagodas transformed from the 3 Vajra scepters smashed down toward Wuqi's head with the force of Mount Tai. Wuqi remained motionless, letting the pagodas hit his head one after another. Amidst a deafening rumble, sparks flew out from Wuqi's scalp, and the golden pagodas shattered, turning into countless pieces of pure gold that shot out in all directions. The force of the pagodas hitting Wuqi was hundreds of millions of kilograms, but when they smashed into Wuqi's head, the force that came out from under Wuqi's scalp was 1,000 times that of the pagodas. These pagodas couldn't bear the counterforce of hundreds of billions of kilograms. The pure and brutal physical force shattered the pagodas into pieces, and the 3 great Buddhist treasures immediately turned into broken trashes. The arhats roared furiously as they leaped to Wuqi's side, swinging their fists at him in the shape of dragons and tigers. Their fists were like dragons, and their roars were like tigers. The 3 golden arhats were all at the peak of the arhat realm, and they were only half a step away from the realm of Bodhisattva. The golden arhat body that they had tempered had the power to move mountains and drain the seas. With a gentle shake, they could shake the stars. Now that the 3 of them were attacking Wuqi with all their might, they were confident that their fists could penetrate Wuqi's body. Wuqi allowed their fists to land on his body. He didn't even activate his magic power to defend his body. He just took a slight breath, and the muscles on his body caved inwards before suddenly bouncing outwards. The 3 great arhats howled miserably. Their fists fell on Wuqi's body, but Wuqi's muscles caved inwards, and their fists, which contained infinite power, missed. Then, Wuqi's muscles bounced back, and a counterforce that was 10,000 times stronger than the force of their fists swept back like a raging wave. The arhats only felt a sharp pain coming from their fists, followed by their arms, shoulders, and then their whole bodies. After spending countless reincarnations, spending countless generations in the mortal world, accumulating an unknown amount of virtues, and exchanging an unknown amount of power of faith, the supreme-grade golden body of arhat that he had finally formed shattered like a pile of sand. Countless golden powders scattered in all directions, then were sucked into his stomach. The true fire of life burned fiercely inside Wuqi's body, and with a roll of chaotic energy, the 3 golden arhats turned into pure heat that circulated throughout his body, making his body a little stronger. Not bad at all. Wuqi praised delightfully. Finally, both of his hands began to move. His right hand swung out like lightning, and the 9 fist-sized, sparkling and translucent white sariras were lightly flicked by him. The true souls of the arhats in the relics were shattered by him, and the relics, which contained a very strong spiritual sense and mind power, were casually swallowed by him. The chaotic energy wrapped around the swallowed relics and quickly digested them into a rolling heat flow that rushed straight into his spiritual sea. Wuqi's spiritual soul lit up, and his spiritual sense became a little stronger. The shattered fragments of the true souls of the arhats were sucked into Wuqi's spiritual soul, and the memories of the 3 arhats were quickly absorbed by him. Those miscellaneous life experiences were discarded by Wuqi, and he focused on the cultivation method of the 3 treasures almighty salvation scripture that the 3 arhats practiced. The 9 chapters of the 3 treasures almighty salvation scripture could allow an ordinary mortal to cultivate to the level of a 15th tier gold immortal. If he wanted to develop to a higher realm, he would need the following scriptures and mystic arts. The inheritance these three arhats received was not complete, but they were only top-level arhats now, and had not yet stepped into the realm of gold immortals. Yet, they already had the mystic arts that could allow them to cultivate to the level of a 15th-tier gold immortal. After defeating the three great arhats with ease, Wuqi grinned at the heaven immortals in the distance, their faces pale. "Since you're here, don't leave." With a wild laugh, a strong gust of wind behind Wuqi quickly condensed into a green hurricane. Activating the wind-controlling technique of the Song of Gale, the gust of wind transformed into three palm-sized green wind blades that whistled toward the chests of the three heaven immortals. The Song of Gale came from the inheritance of Reverend Gale, an almighty expert who cultivated to the realm of primordial with his own strength. So, how could the cultivation technique he inherited be trivial? The peak-level heaven immortals could not fight back against the wind blades unleashed by Wuqi. They could only watch helplessly as the wind blades came right in front of them, and three golden arrows of blood shot up into the sky. Wuqi had killed the heaven immortals with just one strike. Like a bolt of lightning, Wuqi plunged into the bodies of the heaven immortals, whose glabella was split open. Then, he ripped off the storage rings on their fingers and used his divine sense to forcibly break the defensive restrictive spells on the rings. "Poor bastards," cursed Wuqi in exasperation. When he saw that the flying swords unleashed by the three heaven immortals were very powerful and of the grade of a top-grade heaven immortal artifact, Wuqi thought the three heaven immortals must be very rich. To his surprise, their storage rings were empty, with only a few dozen mid-grade immortal stones and a few bottles of life-saving immortal pills. There was not even a single upper-grade immortal stone. Instead, there was a golden scroll in each of their rings, on which were promissory notes written by the three poor heaven immortals. Wuqi did not know whether to laugh or cry when he read the promissory notes with his divine sense. It turned out that in order to craft the three mighty immortal swords, the three of them had pooled together all their belongings, but they still did not have enough materials. Therefore, they had borrowed a lot of materials from the heaven's master blacksmith, Ganjiang, to craft the swords. Ganjiang. Ganjiang is actually a master blacksmith of the celestial court. Wuqi raised his eyebrows and laughed in a low voice. "Well, you're out of luck for lending money to these three poor bastards, and so am I. You can't get back at me for this." With a wry smile, Wuqi put away the three immortal artifact-grade storage rings and crushed the promissory notes into pieces. Only now did he realize that the immortals of the celestial court could only use the various immortal artifacts provided by the celestial court. If they wanted powerful immortal swords, they would have to spend a huge amount of materials to customize them from the master blacksmith of the celestial court. It showed that the celestial court was not a paradise. At least, there were some poor bastards in the celestial court who owed huge debts. Grinning coldly, Wuqi glanced at the back mountain of Green City, which had been turned into a pile of rubble by his brief battle with the heaven immortals and arhats. Shaking his head indifferently, he spun, transformed into a wisp of white smoke, and flew toward the Arctic. He had killed Daoist Miao Yun, Shengguanyi, and all the cultivators of Green City behind him, and wiped out all his old friends in the underhand sect. He no longer had anything to do with Earth. It was time for him to return to Panga continent and focus on his own plans. The past was over. Now, his friends, his lover, and everything he had were all on Panga continent. That was his foundation. Daoist Miao Yun, who was once so powerful that even Wuqi and others could not resist him, was now crushed to death by Wuqi like an ant. Looking back on his encounters over the years, Wuqi felt that life was like a dream, and it was really incredible. It was a gold immortal fruit that could not be attained by a proper cultivator even after spending several eons, yet it had fallen into his hands so easily. The fate of the heaven and earth was ever-changing, and it was truly terrifying and lamentable. As he sighed with emotion, Wuqi felt that his heart was extraordinarily clear and bright. His state of mind, which was a little erratic, had become as bright as a Vajra relic, and had become extremely hard. No external object could ever shake his state of mind. Flying under the blue sky and white clouds, over the blue sea, with the wind whistling past his ears, Wu Qi felt refreshed and calm. He had never been in such a good state. He flew slowly, slowly approaching the Arctic Circle. The teleportation formation he had used to come here was at the South Pole, but Wu Qi did not plan to use it. It was his instinct, and an excellent thief would never use the same route. More than 100 kilometers away from the North Pole, Wu Qi stopped over a thick layer of ice. Wu Qi nodded with satisfaction when his divine will penetrated the thick layer of ice and found nothing unusual. It was the effect of the magical restrictive spell laid out by Prince Chang Qin and others. The spell was inherited from an ancient god who served the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan. His special ability was to fuse all things with the heaven and earth, completely erasing the energy fluctuations of these objects. Unless there was a special incantation, outsiders would not be able to find the hidden items. The teleportation formation at the North Pole was hidden with such a spell. Wu Qi glanced around and softly recited a spell. As Wu Qi recited the spell, a tiny gap silently opened up in the layer of ice below, from which a faint energy fluctuation sprayed out. The teleportation formation was right below, and as Wu Qi recited the spell, it was automatically calibrating its coordinates and locking onto the direction of Panga continent. Just as Wu Qi was about to sneak into the ice and return to Panga continent, a fat figure quietly emerged from behind him. "Little benefactor, you are fated to meet the Buddhist League." The fat monk, with a smile on his face, casually pressed his palm against Wu Qi's back. A tremor ran through Wu Qi as an extremely pure and blazing Buddhist energy rushed into his body, shattering his internal organs in an instant. The monk chuckled and said in a low voice, "I am Buddha Futu, the one who presides over the 840 million mortal worlds under the decree of the Lord Buddha. Little benefactor, you have killed 3 of my arhats, so you are fated to meet the Buddhist League." The smile on Buddha Futu's face was amiable, but his attacks were like a storm. 18 palm strikes landed all over Wu Qi's body, causing his bones to creak and his body to plunge into the ice like a meteor. A deafening rumble rang out, and with Wu Qi at the center, the entire North Pole disintegrated. The ancient Xian Bing cracked, sending huge icebergs flying into the sky. Waves around the North Pole rose tens of miles high, and the whole earth trembled slightly because of the blow. Chapter 770. All his internal organs had ruptured, but he did not suffer too much pain. When Wu Qi was smashed into the ice, he had spread out the chaotic energy in his body. His internal organs had turned into a vast and pure chaotic energy that circulated through his body. At the same time, the bloodline of the divine beast, the ancient Blackwater true ape, was stimulated, and his body was quickly transforming into that of a true ape. His internal organs, muscles, bones, and even blood vessels and meridians were rapidly transformed. All the structures in his body were turned into chaotic energy, and then reformed into body tissues that were completely different from those of a human body. The divine beast transformation of the 7 foundation elevating technique had given him an incredible tolerance to all kinds of injuries. As long as the chaotic energy in his body was not depleted, and as long as he could still exercise the mystic art, any injury would be healed by the subsequent transformation, as long as he exercised the divine ability. The collapsed iceberg submerged Wu Qi's body, which had suddenly grown to hundreds of feet tall. Seawater rose into the sky and splashed onto Wu Qi's huge, black ape body, and an endless power came from the seawater. The ancient Blackwater true ape, like the legendary water god Gonggong, was a divine beast born from the first wisp of innate true water aura. It was born with the innate divine ability to control all the water energy in the world, and was said to be a fearsome divine beast that could never be defeated as long as there was a water source nearby. But this was the North Pole of the Earth. Beneath the thick ice was endless seawater. An enormous amount of water element energy rushed into Wu Qi's body while cheering. Underneath the several tens of feet long and thick black hair, his sturdy muscles were bulging. Every single muscle was roaring like a raging dragon, and the muscle fibers were twitching violently, producing loud noises that sounded like the explosion of a cannonball. Through the thick ice and seawater, Wu Qi's scarlet eyes stared fixedly at the chubby Buddha Futu, who was wearing a big smile on his face. A sneak attack from behind? How could a mighty Buddha launch a sneak attack from behind? If the Buddha could kill Wu Qi, he would have nothing to complain about. However, the sneak attack from behind by a mighty Buddha had only cost Wu Qi a little bit of his chaotic energy. This was too humiliating. Moreover, as the endless water energy kept pouring into his body, Wu Qi was rapidly transforming it into chaotic energy. With the black water true ape's control over water energy, the water energy pouring into his body was thousands of times faster than Wu Qi could absorb it himself. As a result, the little bit of chaotic energy he had just lost had long been replenished. The 7 foundation elevating technique was truly marvelous. Wu Qi laughed soundlessly. Hovering over him, the poor Buddha Futu pretended to put his palms together and chanted a Buddhist mantra, "Merciful Buddha, have mercy. You also annihilated the descendants of Qingcheng, this is a crime worthy of 10,000 deaths. Forget it, forget it. This penniless monk will send you to the afterlife and let your soul dissipate, completely eliminating the suffering of the mortal world." Buddha Futu pressed his right palm forward, and a white lotus flower bloomed in his palm, from which, a 33-storied golden pagoda slowly shot out of the lotus flower. As soon as the pagoda touched the wind, it grew thousands of feet tall and radiated a dazzling golden light. Every inch of the pagoda was carved with the true forms of countless Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Vajras, and many other saints of the Buddhist League. Pure and powerful Buddhist energy was producing deep rumbles that sounded like a tsunami. The pagoda was Buddha Futu's true form, a pagoda discovered by the Lord Buddha in the chaos, and had accompanied him when he was still a golden Arhat. From an Arhat to a Bodhisattva, and from a Bodhisattva to a Buddha, he had gone through countless tribulations and finally stepped onto the throne of the Lord Buddha, becoming the supreme leader of the billions of Buddhas in the universe. Buddha Futu had been protecting Amitabha throughout the immeasurable eons. Therefore, after Amitabha became the Lord Buddha, he did not hesitate to use his blood essence to transform the pagoda, allowing Buddha Futu to transform into a human and become a Buddha. Then, he asked him to guard the mortal world, the foundation of the Buddhist League. Buddha Futu had accompanied Amitabha for countless eons, and was his absolute confidant. Therefore, he was the most suitable person to guard the mortal world. It was also because Buddha Futu had cultivated his Buddha body from a pagoda that he was not as particular as other Buddhas, and his means of doing things were no different from those of demons. He only cared about the result in everything he did, and that was why he sneaked up on Wu Qi from behind. As soon as the pagoda appeared, a terrible Buddhist energy transformed into a golden torrent and pressed down on Wu Qi's head. A pleased smile came over Buddha Futu's face. In his opinion, anyone who dared to infringe on the interests of the Buddhist League was a evildoer, a vile spawn. Be it a evildoer or a vile spawn, there was no need for such things to exist, as they could just be killed. Therefore, other Buddhas of the Buddhist League would often use their mighty divine abilities to subdue some unusual demons and make them their guardians. But, Buddha Futu had never had any unusual demons serving him. As the Buddhist energy came whistling down, Wu Qi let out a wild laugh. His huge body, shrouded in water energy that looked like black dragons, tore through the ice and flew up into the sky. The black water true ape, who had grown to about 10,000 feet tall, threw his head back and let out a furious roar. Countless bodies of water on Earth responded with a deafening roar, and an immeasurable amount of water energy transformed into numerous dragons that streaked across the void and pounced toward Wu Qi. With 2 streams of water energy in his hands, each hundreds of feet thick and 100 miles long, as if he were holding 2 giant dragons, Wu Qi grinned hideously at the dumbfounded Buddha Futu, then waved a stream of dark water energy backhandedly and smashed it toward the golden Buddha's power that was pressing down from above. A deafening boom rang out, and the purest innate water energy held the golden Buddhist power firmly in midair. No matter how hard Buddha Futu exercised his divine abilities and mystic arts, and the golden torrent kept tearing through the black water vapor, the water element was soft. No matter how many layers of water vapor were destroyed, there was still an endless supply of water vapor, so Wu Qi was not afraid of Buddha Futu's war of attrition. Then, Wu Qi waved his other hand, and the 100-mile-long black dragon let out a deafening roar of rolling waves. Amidst the roar, a dark shadow flashed past, and Wuqi's heavy blow landed on Buddha Futta's chest. A deafening rumble rang out. Buddha Futta's kasaya emitted 7 layers of light to protect his body, and a vast amount of water vapor exploded in front of his chest. Buddha Futta was knocked hundreds of miles away, but he was not injured at all. Buddha Futta was Amitabha's absolute confidant, and the kasaya he wore had an extraordinary origin. Amitabha had personally asked the current great celestial emperor of the celestial court, who had ordered countless immortals under the jurisdiction of the celestial court to gather the clouds and all kinds of innate energies into thin threads, which were then jointly made by the experts of artifact refinement from the Tao League and the Buddhist League. The seemingly ordinary kasaya was inlaid with a total of 49,000 mysterious pearls, and its various restrictive spells were extremely powerful. With this kasaya on, Buddha Futta could escape unscathed even if he was attacked by more than 10 opponents of the same cultivation base. With a strange laugh, Wuqi sprung up and chased after Buddha Futta. The ocean was full of water vapor, and the black water true ape was a divine beast born to control water. With the help of the water element, Wuqi's speed was so fast that it was impossible to catch him. In just a blink of an eye, he had come behind Buddha Futta, raised his huge fist, and smashed it at the latter with all his strength. It was a well-known fact to all cultivators under the heaven that dragons had strong fleshly bodies. However, in this world, there were many divine beasts that possessed innate divine powers that were several times stronger than the dragon race. For example, the Blackwater True Ape was one such innate divine beast. An adult Blackwater True Ape could easily suppress a true dragon that had a higher cultivation base than itself with brute force. For the Blackwater True Ape, the so-called divine abilities of shifting the stars were as easy as eating and breathing. Deafening rumbles kept coming from the sky. Wuqi's fist landed on Buddha Futta, sending him flying forward. Then, with a sway of his body, he came in front of Buddha Futta and punched him again, sending him flying backward. After throwing thousands of punches in a row, Buddha Futta's kasaya kept bursting with dazzling light. Several layers of protective light were shattered by Wuqi, but his body did not fly more than a mile away. Wuqi's speed was frighteningly fast. No matter where Buddha Futta was sent flying, he would rush to his side and punch him back. Buddha Futta was battered by Wuqi's heavy fists. He cried out and tried to recite a spell or perform an incantation gesture to teach Wuqi a lesson, but every time, his dharma was broken by Wuqi's heavy punches. The poor Buddha Futta had a very high status in the Buddhist League. Ever since he was transformed into a human by Amitabha, he had never experienced such a fierce fight. Although he had the experience of subduing demons and devils, he only relied on his cultivation base of a Buddha to bully some little demons and devils who were not even heaven immortals. In terms of combat experience, Buddha Futta was like a blank sheet of paper. So, he was so flustered by Wuqi's random punches that his mind went blank, and he even forgot how to fight back. He even forgot that his true form was a pagoda. If he had remembered this and summoned his true form, with the pagoda's incredible defense, how could Wuqi get close to him? The aggrieved Buddha Futta was beaten by Wuqi for a full quarter of an hour, until he was dizzy and forgot where he was. Fortunately, the kasaya he was wearing had an amazing defense. No matter how many punches Wuqi threw at him with all his might, none of them could touch his skin. Just as Buddha Futta was hesitating whether to ask his master, Amitabha, for help, Wuqi opened his mouth and spat out the natural phenomena medallion. A gust of wind mixed with countless heavenly thunders and earthly fires roared out of the small jade medallion, sweeping Buddha Futta into it in a flash. Terrible explosions kept ringing out. The natural phenomena medallion was a powerful magical artifact crafted by the ancient sacred Emperor Xuanqiu himself, and its wind, fire, and thunderbolts were all made from the purest innate energy source. As soon as the gust of wind, heavenly thunders, and earthly fires hit the kasaya, 6 of the 7 layers of light on it were shattered. Before Buddha Futta could react, a plume of dark smoke rushed out of the top of Wuqi's head. The dark-green celestial tower whistled and poured down a great sheet of starlight, slowing down the flow of time around Buddha Futta by 100 times. Buddha Futta's body stiffened, and he froze to the spot. Meanwhile, the blood centipede sword had already slashed at his waist with a sharp blood-red beam. With a crisp crack, the last layer of light on Buddha Futta's kasaya shattered, and the blood centipede sword tore through his body and cut him in half. Amidst a miserable howl, Buddha Futta's upper body transformed into a beam of golden light and flew back into the pagoda. Wu Qi threw his head back and roared, then opened his mouth and swallowed the lower half of his body, which had turned into golden liquid. The pagoda flew whistling into the void and disappeared, while Wu Qi hurriedly flashed into the teleportation formation under the North Pole. The formation flickered with a bright light, and in the blink of an eye, Wu Qi vanished without a trace. Chapter 771. Not long after Wu Qi left with the teleportation formation, Buddha Futta, whose face was ashen and his fat body had shrunk by 3 times, returned to the sky above the Arctic Pole with a gust of fragrant wind. The part below his waist that had been chopped off had already regenerated, but he had used up too much of his vitality. At this moment, he looked shriveled, like a dried bamboo shoot. He no longer had the plump aura from before. That vile creature! That vile creature! Buddha Futta trembled with rage as he pointed a finger at the teleportation formation that had quietly turned to dust. Clearly, Wu Qi had returned to Pangu continent with the teleportation formation, and he had immediately activated the formation's defensive mechanism, causing it to self-destruct. A gust of wind blew by, and in the next moment, a young novice monk, who looked to be only 13 or 14 years old and had red lips and white teeth, appeared beside Buddha Futta. With a smile on his face, the young novice monk glanced at the icy layer of the Arctic Pole, which had been turned into a mess by the battle, then shook his head and sighed softly. With a gentle wave of his hand, a sheet of light swept across the place, and the Arctic Pole was restored to its original state. "Listen up, Futta." The young novice monk chuckled. Buddha Futta hurriedly stood still and looked at the young novice monk with blinking eyes. The young novice monk shook his head and said, "This is a lesson for you. If you still can't refine your true form into a human, you'll have to suffer more next time. Your current body is just the condensation of a wisp of my true spirit. Although you have the cultivation base of a Buddha, your body is too weak. If you don't refine your true form into a golden body and fuse it with your true spirit, you'll never be able to fight a real almighty expert." The young novice monk sniffed, narrowed his eyes, and shook his head with a sigh. "It will be shameful if an enemy as strong as a gold immortal can hurt a Buddha like you." Buddha Futta answered with a frown. A beam of golden light rushed out of the top of his head, and the pagoda that stood thousands of feet tall appeared once again. He looked up at the pagoda in distress and scratched his head helplessly. His true form was this pagoda. Although he was in a human form now, it was only the condensation of a wisp of his true spirit. Only by working hard in his cultivation, cultivating his true form into a golden body, and fusing his true spirit with the golden body, could he finally be considered as a real Buddha. But how sturdy was his body? How much effort would it take to refine him into human form? It had been several eons since Buddha Futta was enlightened by Amitabha, but even after he had spent so many eons refining his true form, the pagoda was still a pagoda, and there was no sign of it transforming into a human form. Glaring at Buddha Futta, who was wearing a bitter face, the little monk gently pressed his palm on the top of his head. A beam of faint golden light with a strange aroma was injected into Buddha Futta's body, causing his shriveled body to inflate like a balloon. In the blink of an eye, he had returned to his fair, chubby appearance. The essence chi that had been cut in half by Wu Qi had completely recovered, and was even stronger than before. Buddha Futta put his palms together and bowed respectfully to Xiao Sha. "Thank you, revered one." This handsome and seemingly harmless little monk was none other than the current leader of the Buddhist League, the spiritual sustenance of millions of Buddhas, the most powerful almighty expert in the Buddhist League, Lord Buddha Amitabha. Narrowing his eyes, Amitabha said in a deep voice, "All right, let's call it a day. Since things have come to this, we must act according to our plan. Even if someone intervenes, what can they change?" With a cold snort, Amitabha turned into a breeze and faded away, leaving only a faint voice echoing in the air. "Focus on carving your foundation, Futta. This is the foundation of your Tao. In this mortal world, if there are people who like to cause trouble, just let them do it. This is the general trend, and there's no need to pay attention to these trivial matters. Once this is done, the glory of the Buddhist League is right in front of us, and we'll settle everything with them one by one. Amitabha's voice faded away in the air, leaving behind only a sigh that seemed to be filled with hesitation and even a hint of panic. But no one heard the sigh, and even if they did, they would not believe what they heard. Was Amitabha hesitating? Was Amitabha panicking? How was that possible? What could make him hesitate? What could cause him to panic? Buddha cackled. He glanced around, then locked his hands into a Buddhist incantation gesture and cried out in a deep voice, "Forget." A beam of golden light swept across the earth, erasing all the memories and records related to the battle just now. The memories of all the people in this mortal world were wiped clean by Buddha, and all living beings continued to develop according to the will of the immortals and Buddhas. Not to mention what Amitabha and Buddha had done on earth. After rushing into the teleportation formation, Wuchi quickly transformed into a stream of light and sped toward Panga continent. A beam of silver-green starlight flickered rapidly on his body. It was a beam of light left on him by the mirror of Kunlun, which had increased his speed by countless times. The long journey to Panga continent, which should have taken him a very long time, had taken him less than a breath of time. The pressure around him lightened abruptly, and in the next moment, Wuchi appeared in a valley covered with green grass on Panga continent. Without bothering to look at the surrounding scenery, he hurriedly pressed his palm on the teleportation formation, activating the self-destruction restriction of the teleportation formation. The teleportation formation on the North Pole immediately self-destructed. This was what Prince Changqin had specifically told him. If anyone found out he was using a teleportation formation, he must destroy it immediately. Wuchi could understand the key to this. Du had a very strict control over Panga continent. If ordinary immortals wanted to enter Panga continent, they had to go through the immortal passes jointly set up by Du and the Celestial Court, and could only stay on Panga continent briefly after going through a strict inspection. However, the teleportation formation constructed by Prince Changqin and the others could bypass the supervision of the immortal passes. It would not be a good thing if any of them were to be controlled by the immortals. As soon as the formation was destroyed, Wuchi suddenly felt a great heat flow erupting out of his body. Just now, he had severed Buddha's fleshly body, which was not his actual fleshly body, but formed from a wisp of his true spirit fused with the immense willpower of his believers. In fact, Buddha's fleshly body could be regarded as a nascent soul with the overall strength of a Buddha. Therefore, when Wuchi devoured half of Buddha's body, there was no flesh and blood essence in it, only an enormous stream of pure willpower, which contained a great deal of Buddha's memories. The time Wuchi spent in the teleportation formation was so short that the willpower he had devoured did not have the time to explode. When he was teleported to Panga continent and destroyed the exposed teleportation formation on the other side, Wuchi relaxed his mind, and the golden juice he had devoured immediately took effect. The willpower of the Buddhist League, which was enough to burst Wuchi's body, surged violently inside him. The chaotic energy quickly devoured it, but it was the willpower transformed from half of Buddha's body, which was equivalent to half of Buddha's cultivation base. Wuchi's cultivation base was only equivalent to that of a fifth-tier gold immortal, while Buddha was a real primordial expert. Although Buddha was only a ninth-tier primordial expert, half of his cultivation base was enough to burst hundreds of thousands of Wuchi to pieces. Wuchi was sweating profusely. He felt as if tens of thousands of suns were exploding inside him, and both his body and divine soul were about to be destroyed by the terrible force. For a moment, Wuchi was very upset. He had lost his mind just now by devouring half of a Buddha's body. Wasn't he courting death? Countless information rushed into Wuchi's divine soul. Buddha's body was the condensation of his true spirit, and when Wuchi devoured half of it, he had also devoured many of his memories. Among the information that rushed into Wuchi's divine soul were all the techniques of the 33 boundless heavens Buddha's expiation scripture cultivated by Buddha himself, and all the essences of the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture cultivated by Lord Buddha Amitabha. Wuchi felt as if a huge pie had smashed onto his head. Buddha Phutta's cultivation technique was of no use to Wu Qi unless he had a pagoda of his own. But Amitabha's great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture was a supreme mystic art of the Buddhist League. Apart from Amitabha himself, only Buddha Putta, who had followed him for countless eons, knew all the techniques of this mystic art. Even Amitabha's many disciples, including many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, only practiced the various divine abilities of the Buddhist League derived from the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture. Compared to the mystic art cultivated by Amitabha himself, it was like a drop of water in the ocean. Now that Wu Qi's body was in danger of exploding, he could not care less about anything else, and whether there would be any bad consequences after practicing Amitabha's cultivation technique. He took a deep breath and immediately sent the chaotic energy in his body into his interstitial world, leaving only his empty body behind. His enormous divine will guided a wisp of raging Buddhist willpower into his forehead, and Wu Qi sat cross-legged in the remote valley surrounded by green grass and began to practice Amitabha's special cultivation technique with all his might. A faint ringing of a bell came from Wu Qi's heart. In an instant, Wu Qi's skin turned pale golden, and a tiny wisp of white light began to flicker between his brows. The enormous divine will in his divine soul was quickly transformed into the willpower of the Buddhist League. Wu Qi began to recite the mantra of the Buddhist League, circulating his cultivation technique again and again according to the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture. It truly deserved to be called Amitabha's special divine ability. When Wu Qi began to practice this cultivation technique, the enormous willpower, which was completely out of his control, immediately turned into an obedient little lamb. It flowed through Wu Qi's body according to his will, and at last, all the willpower was sucked into his forehead. Deep and powerful ringing of a bell kept ringing out from Wu Qi's heart, sounding like the evening drum and morning bell, emanating a profound and thought-provoking aura. The golden hue on Wu Qi's skin grew brighter and brighter, then gradually turned obscure, and finally turned into an ancient and heavy dark golden color. As Wu Qi chanted the name of Buddha, 3 extra faces suddenly grew out of his head, facing east, south, west, and north. His body was shrouded in a faint golden light, and then 6 more arms poked out of his body. With 4 faces and 8 arms, his aura was solid and round like an indestructible Amitabha pearl. His energy essence was completely restrained inside his body. About 1/10,000th of the enormous willpower from Buddha Putta had been digested by Wu Qi, which had directly elevated Wu Qi's magic power, cultivation base, and fleshly body to the level of a second-tier gold immortal. Once Wu Qi had fully absorbed the enormous willpower hidden between his brows, he would be standing on the threshold of the realm of primordial. Coupled with the skeleton of the ancient immortal that was gradually digesting and absorbing in his body, Wu Qi's overall strength would certainly undergo a tremendous change if he was given a little time. On top of that, he had also formed the golden body of the Buddhist League, and the Dharma idol with 4 faces and 8 arms contained endless magical effects. Even Wu Qi needed time to study its various mysteries. Taking a deep breath and dismissing the Dharma idol, Wu Qi grinned and stamped his feet. An underground energy vein surged, and he had exercised the Kwafu chasing the sun's step and left quickly. In just a few leaps, he was already 10 billion miles away. Chapter 772. Following the map in Changqing's jade slip, Wu Qi ran wildly across Panga continent. Yuxiong Plain was the birthplace of the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan. But now, he was no longer in Yuxiong Plain, and Liangzhu had become the capital city of Diyu. The former sacred emperor of the human race had become the most powerful man on Panga continent, and even played a decisive role in the entire universe. His residence had been moved to the land of the sacred emperor, located far to the north of Yuxiong Plain. Sensing the surging underground energy veins, Wu Qi transformed into a gust of wind, a ball of light, and a gust of wind that was no different from the blazing energy in the veins, driving the Kwafu chasing the sun step forward. With every step he took, he covered hundreds of millions or even billions of miles, and with every pulse of the energy veins, Wu Qi was sent far away. With every step he took, a huge amount of Panga's sacred energy rushed into Wu Qi's body, quickly cleansing and tempering his fleshly body, making it stronger and stronger. Tempered by the Panga's sacred energy, Wuqi's fleshly body grew stronger and stronger, and the temperature in his body rose higher and higher. Wrapped in chaotic energy, the remains of the ancient immortals refined by Wuqi's natal true flame were melting rapidly. Wuqi's bones were becoming stronger and stronger, and with every step he took, his overall strength was undergoing a tremendous change. Even the willpower between his brows became active because of Wuqi's rapid running. Controlled by the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture, it kept turning into fragrant sweets that flowed through Wuqi's body, strengthening his fleshly body, his divine sense, and everything else. The Kwafu chasing the sun step was one of the great divine abilities of the human race, and only a few elite human warriors could comprehend the pulse of Panga continent and master it. Running around Panga continent with the Kwafu chasing the sun step was the fastest way for these elite warriors to improve their cultivation base. Every step they took was equivalent to sitting in meditation and cultivating for months. Therefore, when they were free, the greatest hobby of the truly formidable warriors on Panga continent was to roam around the continent. Feeling the pulsation of the earth veins and the strong wind blowing past his ears, he raised his head and saw that the stars in the sky had turned into extremely thin silver beams of light. Wuqi ran to his heart's content. It took him half a month to reach the vicinity of Yuxiong Plain from the deep valley, and another month to the north. At last, he came to a vast mountain range. This mountain still had a primitive and wild aura. There were huge ferocious beasts and fierce birds everywhere. The poisonous insects and snakes on the ground were especially huge. There were grass snakes that were thousands of feet long, centipedes that were hundreds of feet long, mosquitoes that were the size of water tanks, and many other strange creatures. This mountain range was also the most dangerous place in the north of Diyu. It was called the North Ridge, and it stretched for 1 trillion miles. Beyond the North Ridge was the territory of the legendary Northern Black Emperor. The Northern Black Emperor was an almighty figure who had existed since the creation of the world. The ancient gods under his command were all ominous deities who represented plagues and disasters. Most of the most ferocious and violent mountain spirits and water monsters under the heaven were gathered under his command. The reason why the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan had finally settled his residence in the North Ridge was to keep a close watch on the Northern Black Emperor and prevent his subordinates from harassing Diyu. A loud rumble echoed out from the ground, and a blast of air spread out in all directions. Amidst the explosion, Wuqi appeared. Drenched in sweat, Wuqi took a few deep breaths. After running for a month and a half, his body was emitting a terrible heat that could melt even gold and iron. His skin had turned red, and blood was flowing rapidly in his veins. The sound of blood rushing through his veins was comparable to the sound of waves in the Yangtze River. After looking at the mountain range that stretched for 1 trillion miles, Wuqi took out the jade slip given to him by Prince Changqin, which recorded the exact location of the land of Sacred Emperor, and crushed it. A beam of light shot out of the jade slip and transformed into a jade-colored portal in front of Wuqi. He strode into the portal, and the scenery around him changed. In just a flash, he was teleported to the depths of the North Ridge. The entire area within 1 trillion miles of the North Ridge was sealed off by the Yellow Emperor Xuanyuan's restrictive magic. As long as one cast the corresponding magic near the North Ridge, he would be teleported to the vicinity of the land of Sacred Emperor. Otherwise, even if Wuqi had the exact coordinates of the land of Sacred Emperor, it would take him more than half a year just to cross the North Ridge, which was still a barren landscape. Prince Changqin had specifically instructed him to come to the land of Sacred Emperor first and ask for an audience with the Yellow Emperor, instead of delivering a letter to Yuxiong Plain. The information must be sent to the Yellow Emperor first, and only then could it be sent to the human emperor. Wuqi had no idea what Prince Changqin was thinking. Perhaps this was simply some kind of a tradition. Twitching his lips, Wuqi cast away the strange thoughts in his mind. In any case, there were too many messy traditions in Diyu, and there were all kinds of strange things that he could not do. Standing on a towering mountain peak, Wuqi gazed into the distance. 1,000 miles ahead of him was the land of Sacred Emperor. It was a cone-shaped mountain that stood 1 million miles tall and nearly 100 million miles in circumference at its foot. Later, it was cut in half by a mighty deity who served the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan with a battle axe, and the cone-shaped mountain became a round platform. Hundreds of millions of humans lived on the flat mountaintop. After being transformed by the divine abilities of many almighty experts, the plain on the mountaintop had become fertile with water and grass. Wu Qi gazed into the distance at the land of Sacred Emperor, where the common people were herding livestock and farming in the boundless fertile land. It was a beautiful scene of idleness and leisure. This man-made plain was the land of Sacred Emperor. The part of the mountain that was chopped off by the great deity was raised into the air, hovering hundreds of miles above the land of Sacred Emperor. This mountain was protected by countless restrictive spells, and was densely covered with countless palaces and pavilions. This mountain, which was renamed Xianyuan Peak, was the current residence of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. According to Prince Changqin, Xianyuan Peak had been refined into a very powerful magical artifact, capable of severely wounding a primordial immortal with a single strike. It was one of the trump cards that the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan used to deter the Northern Black Emperor. Over the course of countless eons, many of the Northern Black Emperor's subordinates who tried to sneak into Diyu and stir up trouble had suffered greatly at the foot of this Xianyuan Peak. As Wu Qi was gazing at the scenery in the land of Sacred Emperor, a long cloud suddenly emerged over it. 12 four-wheeled chariots forged from bronze, pulled by heavenly horses with wings on their backs, were approaching at top speed, accompanied by rumbling thunderclaps. Every single bronze chariot was extremely huge, and every piece of equipment on it was extremely heavy. They gave off a ferocious and barbaric aura. The heavily armored warriors standing on the bronze chariots all had ferocious faces and fierce gazes. They looked like a group of murderous butchers who had been imprisoned for countless years. The chariots came whistling up to Wu Qi. The heavily armored general on the leading chariot pulled out a bronze spear that was 20 feet long, pointed it at Wu Qi, and roared, "Tell me your name and purpose of coming here, boy. If you intend to trespass into the land of Sacred Emperor, you're dead. No matter who your parents, Lao Tzu, are, no one can protect you. I swear on the souls of your ancestors that if you intend to trespass into the land of Sacred Emperor, I'll chop off your head, pierce your heart, crush you, and feed you to the wolves." The general's cultivation base was about the same as Wu Qi's, a second-tier gold immortal. In Diyu's terms, he was a peak-level 8-star cultivator of the second Panga heaven, close to the level of 9 stars. If he were in Liangzhu, he would already be qualified to be a general, but in the land of Sacred Emperor, he was just the leader of a patrol team. Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the hundreds of heavily armored warriors on the 12 chariots behind the general. Even the coachman was a peak-level 9-star cultivator of the first Panga heaven, which was equivalent to a peak-level heaven immortal, while the hundreds of heavily armored warriors were all second Panga heaven cultivators. Twitching his lips, Wu Qi turned to look at the land of Sacred Emperor. The vast expanse of the land of Sacred Emperor was shrouded in a dense purple mist, so dense that mortals could see it clearly with their naked eyes. The Pangu's sacred energy here was even denser than that in Liangzhu, so one could imagine how good the cultivation conditions of the humans living here would be. In particular, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan was a sacred emperor of virtue acknowledged by the heavenly Tao. With the immeasurable virtues, he had attained an immortal body, and had an endless lifespan, just like those immortals. A sacred emperor of virtue like this could always unleash his sacred light of virtue to illuminate the surroundings. Under the protection of his sacred light, the lives of his soldiers were longer than those of ordinary people. Therefore, it was understandable that he had amassed a large number of experts and used such a powerful general as the leader of a patrol team. Glancing at the general, Wu Qi bowed and said, "I, Tan Lang, the Marquis of East Sea Province of Diyu, have come to see the Sacred Emperor on the order of Crown Prince Changqin. I have an important military intelligence." The general paused for a moment, then cried out, "An important military intelligence from Crown Prince Changqin? Show me your proof of identity." Hastily, Wu Qi flipped his hand and produced the seal of the Marquis of East Sea Province, as well as his waist medallion. Then, he flipped his palm, and a clump of purple flame burst into flames. It was the true flame of the human warriors, which could only be produced by compressing and purifying the Panga's sacred energy inside one's body to the extreme. Apart from the strongest human warriors, even those Buddhas and primordial immortals could not cultivate this true flame of the Pangu clan, which was called the true flame of Pangu province. Not bad at all, lad. The captain gave the ball of flame in Wuqi's palm a fierce look. Then, with a pair of razor-sharp eyes, he gazed at Wuqi's face, which looked like a 17 or 18 years old youth. He let out a strange laugh and said, "I think you're younger than 50. I can't believe your cultivation base has caught up with that of Lao Tzu. TSK, how many pills did you take to get to where you are today?" The general sighed with emotion, then grabbed Wuqi's hand and pulled him onto the chariot. "Hold on tight, brothers," he cried out. "Let's go back at once. It's been a long time since Crown Prince Changqin sent us any military intelligence. We can't afford to waste any more time." The chariot whistled through the air, filling the sky with thunderbolts as it sped toward the void where they had appeared out of thin air just now. In the blink of an eye, the chariot had plunged into a dense restrictive barrier. Suddenly, Wuqi's eyes lit up. A huge mountain hovering in midair, as well as hundreds of nearby mountains, appeared in front of him. They had arrived at Xianyuan Peak, the residence of the Yellow Emperor. Chapter 773. While Wuqi was running around Pangu continent, the internal strife of the Yu clan in Zhong province was in full swing. On the day when Princess Zhanglu came to visit, Yu Miao and Yu Miao had a sudden conflict, and the Yu clan was officially divided. As the current clan master of the Yu clan in Zhong province, Yu Miao undoubtedly had a great advantage. On the spot, he ordered the Yu clan's private army to besiege Yu Miao and his companions. Tens of thousands of soldiers attacked together, and the families of Yu Miao and the elders who were close to him were caught in a terrible situation. Most of their relatives lived in Yu clan's mansion, and at Yu Miao's order, more than 70% of them were captured alive. Yu Miao and the elders had escaped from Zhongning city without a hitch, but most of their relatives were under Yu Miao's control. Yu Miao was in charge of the righteous cause, as well as the Yu clan's private army and other forces. Even some of the Yu clan's allies could only communicate with Yu Miao, the clan leader. Therefore, Yu Miao and the dozen elders around him, who represented the Yu clan in Zhong province, were at a complete disadvantage. Over the past month or so, Yu Miao, who was in a good mood, had been chasing after Yu Miao and suppressing him. Those who had won in the struggle for power in the 30 provinces were all captured by Yu Miao's men. Those who were quick to react could still escape, but those who were slightly slower were captured alive on the throne of prefecture overseer by Yu Miao. All the powerful clans in Zhong province were watching the internal strife of the Yu clan. Such internal struggles for power and profit within clans were not uncommon in Great Yu, but few of them were so bloody and vivid. Yu Miao's ruthlessness and the speed of his fall were a classic example of the internal strife of the Yu clan. Originally, there were many wealthy clans in Zhong province who wanted to fish in troubled waters and gain some benefits. But, when the Yu clan in Liangzhu suddenly sent dozens of elders and a large number of experts to visit Yu Miao, all these people who were eager to make a move obediently withdrew their hands. The Yu clan in Zhong province could be offended as much as they wanted, and the Yu clan in Liangzhu could not fight back. Anyone who dared to provoke Yu clan in Liangzhu could go ahead. But, even Bo Zhongfu did not have the strength to compete with Yu clan in Liangzhu, which was an important power of De Yu's Directorate of Celestials. After more than a month of turmoil, Yu Miao's apparent power had been taken over by Yu Miao. The positions of prefecture overseer of 30 provinces, the power of all the branches of Yu clan, and the channels of interest of Yu clan in Zhong province were all taken over by Yu Miao's people. As a result, Yu Zong was accused of colluding with immortals with ulterior motives, and Bo Zhongfu issued an official order to capture him. Under the starry night, under the starlight, Princess Zhanglu floated above a dark cloud with ominous fluctuations emitting from her body. Her enormous divine sense swept through the surroundings like flowing mercury. Her divine sense had completely enveloped the entire state in front of her, and she was searching inch by inch for anything suspicious. A dozen generals with the cultivation bases of the 5 and 6 stars realm of the second Pangu heaven were quietly guarding Princess Zhanglu in 3 serpent-flying ships with thousands of soldiers. These generals and soldiers were the trusted men sent by Gao, King Yufeng. When King Yufeng heard that Wu Qi was ambushed and dragged into the void, he flew into a rage. While complaining about it to Emperor Haozuan, he also sent his spies to gather information about the East Sea province. When Gao learned that Yu Miao was colluding with some powerful nobles of Zhong province to seize the East Sea province's interests, his temper flared up, and he immediately used all his connections in the imperial court to make the fiercest response to the matter. That was why the Yu clan in Liangzhu was able to infiltrate Zhong province so smoothly, and why Princess Zhanglu had thousands of elites around her. Yu Miao's quick fall had something to do with Gao's outburst. He had misjudged the position of Wu Qi in Gao's heart, and the impression Wu Qi had left in the hearts of some people in Diyu. When he did something he should not have done to the foundation of the missing Wu Qi, the reaction from all sides immediately sent the Yu clan in Zhong province, which he represented, into an irrecoverable state. Princess Zhanglu suddenly sneered. She recited a few incantations in a deep voice, and a chilly wind suddenly swept across the world. The bone-chilling cold wind covered the province below. This was a 6th-grade province under the jurisdiction of the central province. The one who ruled this province was the Yi clan, a local clan in the central province. After Bo Zhongfu took over Zhong province, the Yi clan had submitted to him as quickly as possible. After a round of flattery and swearing of loyalty, they had succeeded the former prefecture overseer who had fled, and gained the ruling power of the province. Among those nobles who had colluded with Yu Miao to share the interests of the East Sea province, Yi clan was the most active one. In the revenge launched by Princess Zhanglu more than a month ago, the province ruled by Yi clan was the most miserable one. All the crops, pasture, and vegetation in the province were eaten up by locusts in just 3 days. Then, a plague suddenly broke out, infecting more than 90% of the billions of people in the province and rendering them bedridden. In just over a month, the province was on the verge of collapse. But tonight, Princess Zhanglu sensed with her divine sense that Yu Miao and a dozen elders of Yu clan, who were wanted by Bo Zhongfu, as well as the members of Yu clan who had followed them out of the mansion, were all hiding in a secret chamber in Yi clan's mansion. The air of the whole province was densely filled with plague viruses invisible to the naked eye. These viruses were evolved from the divine power of the avatar of the god of Scourge that Princess Zhanglu had condensed. They were not ordinary viruses. They came and went without a trace, and they did not carry any energy reaction. They looked like living things, but also like inanimate objects at the same time. Unless it was cast by a god whose divine power was incompatible with divine power, ordinary magic and divine ability could not prevent them from being corroded. However, these tiny viruses were equivalent to Princess Zhongli's clones. Her divine sense could control them at any time, and she could know everything that happened within 1,000 feet around them. The viruses had mixed with the air of the whole province, and there was no place in the province that could escape the detection of Princess Zhongli's divine sense. Yu Miao and the others were in the secret chamber of the prefecture overseer's mansion. Princess Zhanglu had clearly sensed their aura. Yu Miao had even borrowed the power of the ghost god he worshipped and sealed off the surroundings of the secret chamber with several powerful magical artifacts. But, in the face of Princess Zhongli's pure divine abilities and mystic arts of ancient gods, Yu Mu's defensive mechanisms were like sieves with holes everywhere, and could not work at all. Under the control of Princess Zhongli's divine sense, the concentration of the plague viruses in the air around Yu Miao and the others was getting higher and higher, gradually reaching a level of quantitative and qualitative change. In the secret chamber, which was spacious but extremely narrow and oppressive, Yu Miao sat cross-legged on a hassock, his face pale. A dozen elders of Yu clan also sat blankly on the hassock, all looking at the secluded elder who sat in the middle. The current head of Yi clan, Yi Tianyan, who was also the prefecture overseer of this 6th-grade province, was sitting awkwardly off to one side, sweat trickling down his body like running water. Yi Tianyan really did not want to entertain Yu Miao and his companions, who looked like stray dogs. But, Yu Miao and his companions were just too strong for Yi clan to resist. Yu Miao had made it clear to him that if he did not take them in, all the members of Yi clan would be killed. Therefore, Yi Tianyan had no choice but to let them stay in the prefecture overseer's mansion. At the thought of those important members of Yi clan who had been cast with vicious restrictive spells and had their lives in Yu Miao's hands, Yi Tianyan had an urge to cry. Why did he listen to Yu Miao's bewitchment when he had nothing better to do? Why did he scheme for the territory of the East Sea? All the crops and vegetation in his territory had been wiped out by the plague of locusts. Not to mention this year, there would be no harvest for years to come. 90% of the people were bedridden and dying, and they could die in large numbers at any time. 90% of the people would die suddenly. Such a thing had never happened in the history of Diyu. It was not hard to imagine what would happen to Yi clan if such a thing happened in the history of Diyu. The wrath of the human emperor. At the thought of it, Yi Tianyan felt a chill run down his neck. Yu Miao and his clan were the bane of all existence. Yi Tianyan clenched his fists tightly, and he had an urge to fight Yu Miao. It was all Yu Miao's fault. If he had not bewitched him, how could Yi clan have been dragged into such a great trouble? But, what kind of deity was guarding the East Sea province? The Marquis of East Sea Province had been sucked into the void and disappeared. How could the East Sea Province still make such a terrible counterattack? All the nobles of Zhong Province who had colluded with Yu Miao to divide the interests of the East Sea Province had suffered all kinds of natural disasters in their territories. Which god of disaster had Yu Miao offended? The secluded elder of Yu clan sat cross-legged on a hassock with his head bowed in silence. After a long while, he nodded slowly and said, "Now that things have come to this, there is only one way to save the Yu clan of Zhong province. The main clan in Liangzhu cannot completely wipe out this branch of the Yu clan of Zhong province. We just need to bow our heads, admit defeat, and give some compensation to the East Sea province. With that, the matter can still be solved." Yu Miao's face fell. "Great-grandfather, how can we bow our heads and admit defeat?" he asked through gritted teeth. The secluded elder and the other elders turned to look at Yu Miao at the same time. How could they bow their heads and admit defeat? The best way was to hand Yu Miao over to take the blame. These elders hated Yu Miao as well. Why did he have to torture Wu Qi? It was one thing for him to kill Wu Qi, but not only was he not killed, the Yu clan of Zhong province was on the brink of total decline. At the thought of their clan members who were captured alive by Yu Miao's order, these elders felt a sharp pain in their hearts. Although they had escaped, most of their clan members had fallen into the hands of the enemy. That was equivalent to wiping out their bloodline. Yu Miao could see the hostility in these elders' eyes, and a surge of anger rushed to his head. He rose to his feet angrily. Just as he was about to scold these elders who had lost their position, he suddenly felt that there was something wrong with the air around him. The air suddenly turned blue, as if it was filled with a thin layer of smoke. He took a deep breath, but not a single bit of oxygen entered his body. Instead, countless tiny things that gathered together and made the air sticky like glue rushed into his body. As soon as they entered his body, these horrible things, which were so tiny that they could not be detected by divine will, quickly grew and multiplied by relying on the nourishment of his blood essence. Before long, they had filled his blood vessels and internal organs. Yu Miao cried out in shock. Beside him, Yi Tianyan's body swayed and fell heavily to the ground. All that was left of Yi Tianyan was a thin layer of human skin. In just a breath's time, all of Yi Tianyan's flesh and blood had been devoured by the plague virus. Thick blue smoke spurted out from Yi Tianyan's cracked skin. This was the plague virus formed from all of Yi Tianyan's blood essence. The secluded elder was horrified. "The enemy is here. Go out and talk to them," he cried out hoarsely. Puff! The elder opened his mouth and let out a mouthful of blue blood. Wisps of blue smoke rose from the blood he spat out. The faces of the elders in the secret chamber fell instantly. Chapter 774. Under the starlight, Princess Xianglu, who was clad in a black palace dress and had her long hair hanging loosely over her shoulders, looked so pale that her face was almost transparent. A thin layer of fluorescent light enveloped her petite body, making her look like a ghost who harvested souls at night. She stretched out her arms, her fingers moving nimbly in various incantation gestures. Amidst her deep chanting, all the plague viruses in the entire province began to gather in the prefecture overseer's mansion. As the night breeze blew, the blue torrents kept pouring into the mansion, converging on the secret chamber where Yu Miao and the others were hiding. The plague viruses transformed from the divine power of the god of Scourge were cunning and vicious. Wherever they passed, the houses corroded and collapsed, and the rocks weathered and turned into sand. If Princess Xianglu had not controlled the viruses to avoid the common people along the way, the provincial capital would have long been turned into a land of death. Shrill howls rang out from the mansion. Amidst their shrill cries, all the people of Yi clan turned into hollow human skins. Their flesh and blood nourished the plague viruses, which turned into plumes of blue smoke and soared into the sky, then turned around and rushed back to the mansion. The members of the Yu clan who were hiding in the mansion were moaning in pain as well. The viruses were corroding their bodies and devouring their flesh, blood, and energy essence. Their cultivation base was much stronger than the members of Yi clan, so their energy essence was very strong. With enough energy essence for the plague viruses to devour, they could live longer. However, as their blood vessels and internal organs were gradually infected by the viruses, the pain became longer and longer. Howling and screaming, they ran around the mansion in agony. The avatar Princess Xianglu had condensed could not only control the plague viruses, but also the so-called god of Scourge, who could cause any calamity. A member of the Yu clan, who was running wildly, suddenly stepped on empty air. A stone step under his feet broke, and he lost his balance and fell to the side. A muffled thud rang out as the poor man's temple hit the sharp corner of the stone step. His head exploded like an egg, and his brains sprayed a few feet away. Another member of the Yu clan was holding his belly and rolling on the ground, groaning in pain. Suddenly, the roof above his head collapsed, and a huge rock with the circumference of dozens of feet fell whistling down, flattening him like a pancake. One of Yu Miao's grandsons could not bear the severe pain in his body either. Roaring furiously, he performed an incantation gesture with both hands and recited an incantation, summoning the power of the ghost god he worshipped, turning it into a ball of raging fire and wrapping him up. He wanted to burn away the plague virus that was invading his body, and at the same time, destroy the virus that was growing in his body. However, the pain in his body suddenly increased by more than 10 times. It was a pain that exceeded the limit of what a normal person could endure. As soon as his fingers loosened, the spell that had just taken shape immediately exploded. Raging flames spewed out of his 7 orifices, and not long after, he was burned to ashes. One of Yu Miao's sons, who was as fat as a toad, struggled to pull out a bottle of detoxifying and life-saving pills with both hands. With great difficulty, he uncorked the bottle and fished out 2 pills the size of pigeon eggs, stuffing them into his mouth. But, as the saliva in his mouth was sucked dry by the plague virus, the 2 pills did not turn into juice. Instead, they rolled down his throat. The 2 pills blocked his throat shoulder to shoulder, forcibly choking his windpipe. A perfectly fine person was stuck to death by 2 life-saving pills. His luck was really bad to the extreme. In just the time it took to finish a pot of tea, more than half of Yu Miao and the dozen or so elders of Yu clan had died because of all kinds of strange things. It was as if the god of plague had possessed them, and they died in all kinds of strange ways. Yu Miao and the others, who had witnessed it with their own eyes, could not believe that their clansmen could have such bad luck. This was the divine power of the god of Scourge. Every move and word of a person who was targeted by this divine power would bring disaster to himself, and any external factors would become the cause of the disaster. Unless there was a divine power that could restrain the divine power of the god of Scourge, the person who was targeted by this divine power would be subjected to all kinds of strange tortures, and it would not stop until the person was tortured to death. There were many divine powers that could restrain the god of Scourge, but the Tao of Ghost and Deity cultivated by Yu Miao and the others did not have the corresponding magic. Although their overall strength was much higher than that of Princess Xianglu, they could do nothing to stop the golden body of the god of Scourge that was wantonly killing their clansmen. A loud rumble rang out as a large gap suddenly cracked open in the ground. Two of Yu Miao's descendants fell into the gap, their necks broken. Seeing that he had lost two more descendants, Yu Miao's eyes turned bloodshot. With a furious roar, he suddenly transformed into a gust of chilly wind and sped straight toward Princess Xianglu, who was hovering in midair. Princess Xianglu narrowed her eyes, which were as bright as the stars in the sky. She gently performed an incantation gesture with her little hands and pressed them toward Yu Miao. Calamity. Suddenly, an iron-billed bird appeared in front of Yu Miao, who was sprinting at full speed. It was a bird that could fly very fast, and its beak could break gold and iron, as well as penetrate all kinds of restrictive spells. In Diyu's army, there was a kind of magic-breaking bolt made from the long beak of an iron-billed bird. Yu Miao dared to swear on the souls of 18 generations of his ancestors that there was not a single iron-billed bird within 100 miles of him just now. But, as Princess Xianglu cried out softly, the iron-billed bird suddenly appeared in front of him, flying at full speed. The iron beak, measuring 1 foot and 2 inches long, accurately pierced into Yu Miao's mouth. A muffled noise rang out as the bird's long beak and neck came out from the back of Yu Miao's neck. Yu Miao's teeth were smashed by the iron beak, and blood mixed with broken teeth flowed down, staining the unlucky iron-billed bird. This was the horror of the god of Scourge's divine power. As long as one was targeted by it, all kinds of strange disasters would fall from the sky, and there was no way to guard against them in advance. Yu Miao, who was groaning in pain from his lungs, had no time to rush to Princess Xianglu. In a flurry, he pulled the iron-billed bird out of the bird's mouth. The hard, coarse iron beak rubbed against his wound, causing his muscles to tremble and cold sweat to pour down his back. With a flip of his palm, a clump of black flame filled with an evil aura pressed heavily against the hole in his neck. Amidst the sizzling sound of skin and flesh being burned, Yu Miao had burned his wound into a bloody mess, temporarily protecting the fatal wound with this cruel mystic art. But, before he could do so, a beam of 5-colored divine light rushed out of the top of Princess Zhongli's head. The golden body of the god of Scourge sat cross-legged in the magnificent shrine, its eyes emitting 2 extremely thin beams of evil light that locked onto Yu Miao's body. The golden body of the god of Scourge slowly raised its finger and snorted at Yu Miao. Suddenly, a meteorite appeared over Yu Miao's head and fell at a high speed. The meteorite measured about 1,000 feet in diameter, and was entirely composed of extremely dense metal essence. Even a palm-sized piece of metal essence weighed tens of thousands of kilograms, so the weight of this meteorite was indeed frighteningly heavy. Yu Miao felt the fierce wind coming from the top of his head. He looked up blankly at the falling meteorite, and his pupils constricted to the size of a needle tip. "Bastard!" he roared at the top of his voice. For a moment, Yu Miao was filled with grief and speechless pain. Why was this huge meteorite coming straight at his head? He had just been severely wounded by the iron-billed ibis, and the pain had numbed his mind. How could he have the time to resist the bombardment of this meteorite? Just as Yu Miao was about to be smashed into a pulp by the meteorite, the secluded elder, shrouded in a thick blue mist, was already flying toward him furiously. Surrounded by a layer of misty flame, the secluded elder resisted the invasion of the blue plague virus. Then, he slapped his palms into the air. 2 giant hands, each about 1,000 feet in circumference, emerged above Yu Miao's head with a deafening rumble. They grabbed the meteor, neutralized its tremendous impact, and casually tossed it aside. The secluded elder stared fixedly at Princess Zhonglu and said through gritted teeth, "The primordial Tao of divinity? He, you've actually awakened the bloodline of the ancient god? What you've condensed is the avatar of the god of Scourge, isn't it? No wonder my clan members have suffered such heavy casualties. You're so cruel, little girl." Princess Zhonglu twitched her lips, sneered proudly, and said, "Cut the crap, old fogey. If not for you plotting against my husband's territory, and looking at your hideous appearance, how could I have the time to waste on you? I don't want to waste my time with you. Anyway, all the members of the Yu clan in Zhong province must die today. Then, she performed an incantation gesture with both hands and recited a spell in a deep voice. Princess Zhonglu performed an incantation. All of a sudden, the secluded elder's body exploded one after another. Bloody holes the size of fists kept appearing on his body, and his flesh and blood were flying in all directions. The powerful incantation he had just prepared to unleash suddenly went out of control and backfired. A circle of ghosts shot out from his palms and attached themselves to his body, biting and gnawing at him. The secluded elder's shriveled body shrank rapidly, and all his blood essence was quickly sucked away by those ferocious ghosts. Yu Miao let out a shrill roar. How presumptuous! How dare a weak girl like you say you want to wipe out the Yu clan? Elders, let's kill this demoness together. We can't let her continue to wreak havoc. While Yu Miao's voice was still echoing in the air, a dozen elders, whose bodies were also exploding, had transformed into wild gusts of wind and rushed toward Princess Zhonglu. The plague viruses in their bodies turned into small bombs that kept exploding. Their bodies were not as strong as those of De Yu's warriors, and their fragile bodies could not withstand the power of the explosions. In just a few breaths of time, they were almost completely blown to pieces. As Yu Miao's cry rang out, these elders gritted their teeth and endured the severe pain while silently reciting spells to summon the ghosts and deities they worshipped. The only thought in their minds at the moment was to gather all their forces and kill Princess Zhonglu as quickly as possible. Princess Zhonglu gave a cold snort and gently waved her hand. At the same time, the dozen military officers sent by Gao gave a loud cry, and except for two who stayed at Princess Zhongli's side, all the other military officers rushed toward the elders, whose bodies were badly mutilated. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in the distant sky, and a dozen large flying ships were flying toward them at lightning speed. Yu Miao had come with a large army of Yu clan. Now that he had fallen out with Yu Miao, he had to kill him and not give him another chance to stir up trouble. This was the opportunity for Yu Miao to take complete control of the Yu clan in Zhong province. How could he let it go so easily? Surrounded by three parties, Yu Miao and his company were in a desperate situation. Chapter 775. The sky was filled with dark blue viruses, which had turned into thick blue clouds and covered the void, swallowing even the light of the stars and the moon. Yu Miao and the other elders of the Yu clan in Zhong province stood blankly in the void, staring blankly at the army that had surrounded them. Yu Miao, Yu Huai, and Yu Mu had arrived with his only son and grandson, but his wife was nowhere to be seen. In addition to the three of them, there were thousands of elite soldiers clad in black leather armors. They were the private army that the Yu clan in Liangzhu had urgently dispatched to support Yu Miao. There were also a dozen old oracles with white hair and beards hovering in the sky, looking down at the besieged Yu Miao and his companions. They were the elders sent by the Yu clan in Liangzhu. The three strongest elders had already stepped one foot into the realm of supreme oracles, and if it were not for the fact that their lifespans had run out and they could no longer find any pills that could prolong their lives, they would all have the confidence to become supreme oracles. With three experts like this joining hands, even if Yu Miao and his companions had a secluded elder among them, there was no way they could turn the situation around. Princess Zhonglu hovered in front of Yu Miao and his companions, her hands tucked under her sleeves as she stared coldly at them in silence. Yu Miao and his companions were already in a hopeless situation, so she did not want to waste her breath on these old men. Had it not been for Yu Miao's desire to seize Wu Qi's property, Princess Zhonglu would not have had the time to deal with him and his companions. She was so busy helping the people of the 6 states settle down their people that her feet could barely touch the ground, and she had no time to waste on Yu Miao and his companions. Princess Zhonglu twitched her lips and took a few steps back on her cloud as she watched Yu Miao arrive with the army of elites from the Yu clan in Liangzhu. She looked at Yu Miao with great interest, wanting to see what means he would use to kill Yu Miao and his companions. Yu Miao laughed bitterly. Trembling, he pulled out a pill bottle and crushed it, then took out 2 pills and tried to shove them into his mouth. However, he almost instinctively glanced at the golden body of the scourge floating above Princess Zhongli's head, and then stuffed the 2 pills back into his sleeves. Just now, he had seen with his own eyes that his unlucky child choked to death by a pill. He didn't want to die in such an ugly way. He breathed a sigh of relief, then looked at Yu Miao and said in a deep voice, "Do you really dare to use the power of Liangzhu to kill me?" This was already a violation of the laws of the Deyu clan. If everyone is like you, using the power of the main clan to bully the branch bloodlines, wouldn't the rules of the Deyu family be corrupted and chaotic? Yu Mu sighed softly. With his hands clasped behind his back, he looked at Yu Miao, shook his head, and said, "We've been fighting for so many years, but I've never been able to defeat you. But this time, you've made a mistake. You've targeted the foundation of the Marquis of East Sea Province, which has infuriated the master of Yen Tian Palace of the Secret Palace. He has sent a memorial to the Human Emperor, and the Human Emperor has ordered us to clean up the scum of Yu clan like you." Laughing grimly, Yu Miao continued in a deep voice, "If the territories of every Marquis of Deyu province are divided before their life and death is determined, won't it make the hearts of countless Marquis of Deyu province bitterly disappointed? Great Elder, by doing this, you have actually destroyed the foundation of Deyu clan." Yu Miao's face twisted into a frown. Gnashing his teeth, he stared at Yu Miao and said in a deep voice, "How could Tan Lang come back alive?" A bright gleam flickered in Yu Miao's eyes. "How can you be so sure that he is dead?" he asked with a cold grin. Yu Miao's face flickered slightly, and his eyes flickered, not daring to meet Yu Miao's eyes. Grinning coldly, Yu Miao nodded slowly and said, "I see. So, you are colluding with the traitors who plotted against the Marquis of East Sea Province? Yu Miao, the evidence is conclusive, and you can't hide it in front of so many people." Princess Zhongli nodded her head slowly and sneered under her breath. No wonder Yu Miao was jumping up and down and colluding with people to plot against the East Sea Province as soon as Wu Qi disappeared. It turned out that he had received some solid news and could confirm that Wu Qi was dead. Did that mean that Yu Miao knew who plotted against Wu Qi from behind? With a cold snort, Princess Zhonglu raised her head proudly and said in a cold voice, "Yu Miao, confess yourself. Who is the person who colluded with you? If you can confess everything, I can." After pondering for a brief moment, Princess Zhonglu shook her head and said, "You have to remove the roots when you are cutting the weeds. It's impossible for you to leave a few descendants, and all your people must be killed. However, Zi Xian can give you an intact corpse. This is the best treatment Zi Xian can give you." The corner of Yu Miao's mouth twitched. Princess Zhongli's words were too much for him to bear. He gave Princess Zhonglu a quick glance, wondering why such a delicate little girl could be even crueler and bloodier than him in words. How could she be so skilled when it came to the business of wiping out an entire clan? After a long silence, Yu Miao suddenly burst into wild laughter. Shaking his head, he said, well, I can't blame anyone for my loss. It's me who has underestimated that little Tan Lang. If I had known this, I would have killed him with a thunderous force. How could this disaster have happened?" Glaring at Yu Miao said in a ferocious voice, "Was it Palace Master Yen Tian who personally reported to the Human Emperor that Liangzhu should meddle in the affairs of Yu clan in Zhong Province? He, that old fool Yu Chen sure knows how to borrow power. Congratulations. The Yu family of the central region can only obediently merge with the Liangzhu Yu family. Congratulations to our Yu family for becoming even stronger." While chuckling, Yu Miao pointed his finger at Yu Miao and said, "Yu Miao, I'll kill you, your son, your grandson, your parents, and all the people who are directly related to you by blood. One day, I'll kill that old bastard Yu Chen with my own hands. If I'm unlucky and he doesn't live that long, then I'll definitely dig up his grave and grind his bones to ashes." Yu Miao laughed wildly, so much so that his saliva was spraying out of his mouth. He looked like a madman. Yu Miao looked at Yu Miao in confusion, wondering why he could still talk so arrogantly at this moment. Didn't he notice that the three elders with the highest cultivation base sent by Yu clan in Liangzhu could easily kill Yu Miao and his companions? Even if that secluded elder from Yu clan in Zhong province was here, he could never be a match for three elders who had stepped into the realm of supreme oracles. Princess Zhanglu vaguely sensed that something was wrong. She performed an incantation gesture with both hands under her sleeves, and the shadow of a silver lotus quietly emerged between her brows. The five-colored divine ray behind her gradually condensed into a hazy lotus-like airwave, which swirled and swirled in the air. A cold, sharp aura kept spreading in all directions, cutting through the nearby void and leaving black marks on the surface of the void. The innate gold and silver lotus was quietly activated, and together with the five thunders immortal zither that had been fused with the spatial-breaking pearl, Princess Zhanglu was ready to respond. Meanwhile, the golden body of the god of Scourge hovering above her opened its eyes slightly. A dense gray divine power swirled around it, emanating an ominous aura that made one feel suffocated, as if some strange calamity would befall Yu Miao and his companions at any time. Yu Miao laughed even more crazily, waving his hands and shouting at the top of his voice, "Good, good. I admit defeat today. But, there's still a long way to go. Let's wait and see." "Ha, Yu Miao, do you think you've won? Do you think you've won? I should have made up my mind long ago. Bah. Since Deyu has been heartless to me, of course I can be heartless to Deyu." Yu Miao's words made the faces of Yu clan's elders fall. Including the secluded elder from Yu clan in Zhong province, all the leading figures of Yu clan looked at Yu Miao in horror and snapped, "Yu Miao, what do you think you're doing?" Even the most insane subject of Deyu, even Feng Lingling, who was executed by the human emperor, did not dare to say that he would be heartless to Deyu just because Deyu had been heartless to him. By saying that, Yu Miao had not only turned against the Yu clan in Liangzhu, but also stood against the entire Deyu dynasty. With a cold snort, Yu Miao held his head up proudly and waved his right hand. An immortal talisman shrouded in purple mist appeared out of thin air in his palm. He coughed a mouthful of blood onto the talisman, and it suddenly burst into flames. "Patriarch! Patriarch!" Yu Miao cried out as he threw his head back. Plumes of purple smoke rose from the burning talisman, forming a huge arched door over Yu Miao's head. A huge gourd shrouded in scorching flames flew whistling out of the arched door. Standing hundreds of feet tall, the gourd slowly turned its head and sprayed out a stream of crimson flame from its mouth. Amidst the flame, hundreds of thousands of flying swords, each the size of a little finger, shot out, leaving countless tiny sword beams in the air like a rainstorm. Accompanied by a deafening roar of wind and fire, the overwhelming flame and the rain of swords fell down. Except for Yu Miao and a dozen elders of the Yu clan in Zhong province, everyone else was engulfed by the flame and the rain of swords. Yu Miao and the others cried out at the top of their lungs. Caught off guard, they were caught in the flame, and the crimson flame burned them badly. The armors of the heavily armored soldiers were burned red, and some were even melted into molten iron on the spot. The rain of swords had a terrible penetrating force, so much so that even the three strongest elders of the Yu clan in Liangzhu had dozens of tiny holes pierced through their bodies. Apart from Princess Zhanglu, everyone present was wounded. Even though Princess Zhanglu had secretly unleashed the innate gold and silver lotus to protect herself, the rain of swords still made the five-colored divine light around her tremble violently. The piercing force of each tiny flying sword was like the weight of Mount Tai, forcing Princess Zhanglu to stagger and fly backward, unable to come up with an effective response. A deep, cold laugh rang out. Immediately after the huge gourd, an immortal dressed in a Taoist robe strode out of the arched door. Judging by his appearance, he was none other than Immortal Gourd, the mastermind behind the Gourd Immortal Market. Immortal Gourd stretched out his hand and transformed it into a huge golden palm, grabbing Yu Miao and the other elders of the Yu clan in Zhong province. He gave Yu Miao a cold glance and said in a deep voice, "Yu Miao, it seems you have some ability. The foundation of the Yu clan in Zhong province has been completely taken away by you. Yu Miao will settle the score with you in the future. I won't fight a junior like you, lest people laugh at me for bullying the weak. Yu Miao and the other members of the Yu clan in Liangzhu stared at Immortal Gourd as if they were looking at a ghost. Yu Miao pointed at Immortal Gourd and cried out in shock, You are. Immortal Gourd gave Yu Miao a ferocious smile, then suddenly burst out laughing and said, I'm true Immortal Gourd. Ha, don't tell me you know me. Laughing wildly, Immortal Gourd climbed onto the huge gourd, ripped open the void, and was about to leave. Chapter 776. King Zhangqiu interrupted Lu Bang and said coldly, This girl has formed her golden body of the ancient god, and she belongs to me. Princess Zhang pointed her finger at true Immortal Gourd and cried out softly, Go. In the imperial court of Diyu, colluding with an immortal was a felony punishable by the extermination of one's entire clan. As the former head of the Yu clan in Zhong province, Yu Zong had cultivated the body of an immortal, and this was a major event that could bring disaster to the entire Yu clan in Liangzhu. If the powerful clans in Liangzhu learned that a member of the Yu family had become an immortal, they would definitely join forces to condemn the Yu family. By then, the Yu family would be humiliated as well. Countless raindrops fell from the sky, and the axe condensed by the grey smoke was shattered into pieces by the raindrops summoned by Yinglong. Princess Zhang let out a clear cry, and the flying sword condensed of gold element energy in her palm shot toward Yu Zong's chest in a silver beam of light. At the same time, the divine ray of five-colored light behind her tumbled, and the energies of earth, water, fire, and wind tumbled and turned into a colorful mountain that smashed down toward Yu Zong's head. Wherever the mountain passed, all the natural energy was absorbed by it. Yu Zong, who bore the brunt of the attack, felt his body sink as all the natural energy around him was sucked dry by the mountain, and his overall strength was instantly suppressed by 30%. Princess Zhang snorted lightly. The grey divine energy that was swirling around the golden body of the god of Scourge suddenly transformed into a huge axe that was tens of feet long. The divine ray of five-colored light rushed up and injected into the grey axe, filling it with all the colors and making it look like it was carved out of crystal. She extracted the innate gold element energy from the lotus and injected it into the axe, and soon, the surface of the axe was coated with a dazzling silver gleam. Princess Zhang's face turned blue with anger. She snorted coldly and continued to extract the gold element energy from the lotus. A silver gleam flickered in her palm as she compressed the rich gold element energy into a flying sword that gleamed with a cold gleam. She was about to unleash the flying sword and attack UK with the invincible sharpness of the gold element energy. But, Yu Miao's gourd was obviously a rare spirit item, and its flame was the nemesis of gold element energy. Therefore, Princess Zhang's flying sword might not be able to hurt him. Lu Bang laughed. A sinister light flashed in his eyes as he summoned the primordial chaos sky-covering flag and threw it at Princess Zhang. On a lofty mountain thousands of miles away, Lu Bang and King Zhangqiu were sitting opposite each other, drinking merrily. Their gazes were focused on Princess Zhang across the distance of thousands of miles. Suddenly, Lu Bang threw down the wine vessel and sighed with pleasure. How can I let such a beautiful girl wander the world and suffer the hardships of being battered by the wind and rain? I have a tender heart for the fairer sex. Why don't? He slapped the gourd beneath him, and a jet of flame sprayed out of its mouth. The sticky, gelatinous flame transformed into a huge umbrella behind true Immortal Gourd, shielding him from all directions. The large umbrella made of raging flames spun rapidly, and the dimensional blade heavily chopped down on the large umbrella, producing a crisp sound. Although the large flame umbrella was cut in half and dissipated into the air, the dimensional blade was also neutralized by the surging flames. After a slight flash, it exploded with a strong light and disappeared without a trace. Laughing strangely, UK said with mixed emotions, if the oracles of Diyu cast aside those lousy rules, any supreme oracle would be able to reach the peak of gold immortal realm in just 1,000 years. TSK, the lifespan of a supreme oracle will run out one day, but when one becomes a heaven immortal, he or she will have an infinite lifespan. Compared to that, I'd rather become an immortal. The elders of the Yu clan in Liangzhu also understood the stakes. Ignoring the injuries they had suffered from Yu Miao's surprise attack, they took out various bone talismans and activated them, using their most powerful mystic arts to attack Yu Miao. But now, both of them had taken a fancy to Princess Zhang at the same time, and they refused to let go of each other. Lu Bang could not help but sigh and say, "Well, why don't we just kill them, lest we hurt our friendship?" Accompanied by a jarring whistling sound, the axe transformed into a silver beam of light and went straight toward True Immortal Gord's head. True Immortal Gord's face flickered. He threw UK and the others aside and pressed both hands on the gourd beneath him. A deafening rumble echoed out as a great plume of flame sprayed out of the gourd's mouth. The thick and viscous flame twisted and twitched in the air, quickly condensing into a huge sawtooth scythe that flew toward Princess Zhang Li's axe. Regardless of what the exclamations of UK and the others meant, Princess Zhang Li just waved her hand. A jarring noise of shattering rang out in the void, and a pitch-black blade of light, about 100 feet long, slashed toward True Immortal Gord with a shrill whistle. Wherever the blade of light passed, countless tiny rifts were torn open in the void, from which came gusts of energy that could be seen with naked eyes, blowing the surrounding mountains to pieces. The winged dragon was also an ancient deity. Even though the winged dragon that True Immortal Gord had summoned out was only a soul, it possessed astonishing power. Each of its raindrops weighed tens of thousands of kilograms. When they struck the great axe, the axe released a deep howl and large swathes of grey energy were peeled off from the surface of the axe. Furthermore, Dragon was an ancient god, and belonged to the category of auspicious gods who blessed the weather. Although its divine power could not completely restrain the power of the god of Scourge, it had a pretty good weakening effect. His face unsightly, UK gritted his teeth and bellowed, "Throughout the generations of the Yu clan in Zhong province, only the former clan leader, Yu Mu, has a beast soul of Dragon. True Immortal Gord, you are really..." Upon hearing Yu Mu's words, Yu Mu, whose face had also turned extremely unsightly, waved his hand and cried out, "Somebody! Capture this traitor who has betrayed De Yu and joined the immortal Dao, dead or alive. Yu Mu has colluded with immortals and is plotting against us. Kill them all." Both men exchanged a glance, their gazes flickering with flames, but neither of them was willing to give in. An existence like Princess Zhang, who had awakened the bloodline of an innate god and formed the golden body of an ancient god, would bring great benefits to both immortals and the experts from De Yu. For King Zhangqiu, if he could marry Princess Zhang, he would be able to keep her bloodline in his clan, and in the future, there would be more descendants who could awaken the bloodline of a god. It was of great significance to the strength of King Zhangqiu's bloodline. True Immortal Gord cried out in surprise. He turned to look at the dimensional dagger unleashed by Princess Zhang, then suddenly nodded and said with a smile, "Little girl, your cultivation base is not that great, but I can't believe you have the ability to tear the void. That's amazing. But it's a pity that your cultivation base is too weak." True Immortal Gord gave a cold snort. Countless tiny, faint golden flying swords shot out from the gourd amidst the raging flames. The countless tiny flying swords kept striking the multicolored axe, causing countless tiny sparks to fly out from the axe. The flying swords and the axe exploded in midair after colliding with each other, but with each collision, the axe dimmed a little. In just 3 seconds, at least 1,000,000 tiny flying swords had slammed into the axe, shattering the 5-colored divine light in it. In the end, only the grey axe, condensed from the divine power of the god of Scourge, was left to hack at True Immortal Gord. In the face of the bizarre and unpredictable divine power of the god of Scourge, True Immortal Gord dared not to be careless. Scorching flames rolled out of his body and merged with the flames rising from the gourd. A beam of red light shot up from the top of his head, reaching a height of a few miles. Gradually, a circular halo as bright as a mirror emerged in the red light. The silhouette of a winged dragon emerged from the halo. The miles-long dragon raised its head and roared into the sky, then opened its mouth and breathed out. Immediately, countless raindrops emerged from the air, striking on the grey axe like arrows. Yu Mu laughed aloud, then pointed at Princess Xianglu, whose face was slightly pale, and said, "Your divine abilities and mystic arts are pretty good, but it's a pity that your cultivation base is a little too low. I'll spare your life today, and in the future, I'll seek revenge on you. When that time comes." Yumu patted Yumu's shoulder and said coolly, "Remember this girl's face. She has awakened the bloodline of an ancient god, and she is a rare match for you. All your children and grandchildren are dead. If you can give birth to a child with her, his aptitude will definitely be excellent." True Immortal Gourd gave Yumu a cold look and said with a cold grin, "That's right, I'm Yumu, the 7th generation great ancestor of Yumu, the former clan leader of Yu clan in Zhong province, and the current True Immortal Gourd. Hee. In those years, I had already stepped one foot into the realm of supreme oracles, but my life was coming to an end. Therefore, I joined the Tao League and practiced the art of energy refinement. In 10 years, I attained the nascent divinity realm, in 30 years I became a heaven immortal, and in just 1,000 years, I became a gold immortal." Yumu smiled respectfully at Yumu and said, "Everything will be as you said, Patriarch. This girl has formed the golden body of an ancient god, and she is indeed a perfect match for you." Seeing that True Immortal Gourd was about to flee with Yumu and the others, Princess Xianglu arched her brows. Her anger soared to the top of her head, and a blood line twitched on her forehead. It was fine if True Immortal Gourd wanted to save the other elders of Yu clan, but she could not let Yumu leave safely, as he had been pestering Wu Qi. "What a good trick. You are a good girl. Why don't you become my partner in dual cultivation?" Just a moment ago, he had said that Princess Xianglu was a perfect match for Yumu. Now that he saw Princess Xianglu was so amazing, he was immediately tempted. He gave a strange cry, and the soul of Ing Dragon hovering above him let out a deafening roar as it swung its claws toward Princess Xianglu. Yumu and Yumu exchanged a glance. Yumu shook his head lightly and said, "He only learned of my existence in the last 100 years. Why am I explaining all this to you? Anyway, if I save Yumu and the others today, someone will come to settle the score with you and Liangzhu in the future." The blade and the axe clashed against each other. The incomparably sharp innate gold element power split the blade into two, but the raging flame swept up, and a large layer of the silver light on the axe was also burned away by the high-temperature flame. The silver light suddenly dimmed down, revealing the multicolored surface of the axe underneath. Amidst a muffled rumble, a few mountains between Princess Xianglu and True Immortal Gourd were smashed into dust by the energy storm, while the dimensional blade unleashed by Princess Xianglu with the help of the 5 Thunders Immortal Zither had reached a place less than 10 feet behind True Immortal Gourd. Pointing at Yumu, Yumu growled, "Yumu has been colluding with you all this time." Only by killing Yumu and his companions on the spot, then taking the initiative to apologize to the human emperor, as well as a few itinerant sects and pushing all the blame to them could he avoid Yu clan's passive position. No matter how strong Yu Miao's current cultivation base was, he was determined to kill Yu Miao on the spot, no matter what the price was. King Zhangqiu pondered for a moment, then finally nodded. Chapter 777. The ancient tree was the dragon blood rejuvenation wood, which was rare even in the ancient times. It was the only strange tree in the world that had no upper limit on its size. Born in the void, it would grow 1 centimeter larger every 10,000 years, and the longer it grew, the larger it would grow. As long as no one cut it down, it could continue to grow without an upper limit. This giant tree was 30,000 miles tall, and the thickest part of its trunk was 3,000 miles. The widest part of its crown and roots was over 100,000 miles in circumference. Judging from its size, this was probably a magical tree that had been growing since the beginning of the world. While Wu Qi was curiously studying the giant tree, a young man and woman clad in white Taoist robes were seen flying up from the top of a mountain not far away. Riding on the back of the dragon, a young man and a young woman clad in white Taoist robes were laughing merrily, driving the wind and pushing the clouds away as they flew into the distance. "Oh, Zi Xian is fighting someone. Let's wait for a few more days. When I'm done with what I have to do, I'll go back to Zhong province and settle the score with Yu Miao. Before I go back, you better not break the bones of that old fellow Yu Miao. With his old age, how can he withstand a few brutal blows from you? But, why did you have a conflict with Yu Miao? Could it be that he has done something again? Nevertheless, in the mouths of these two bull-headed men, those oars were like popcorn-like snacks. They chewed these oars with big mouthfuls, causing a loud creaking noise. After chewing the oars into pieces, they swallowed them into their stomachs, then grabbed other oars and threw them into their mouths. While Wu Qi was still worrying about Yu Miao, fearing that he would not be able to take revenge on him when he returned to Zhong province, he did not know that Yu Miao's entire clan had been killed by Princess Xianglu. Now, the Yu clan in Zhong province represented by Yu Miao was at the end of its tether. If it had not been for Yu Miao's sudden appearance, the Yu clan in Zhong province would have been completely wiped out. When would he be able to avoid all kinds of fights in the outside world, and let the people around him have such a paradise? But, when he thought of the identity of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, Wu Qi sighed again. Perhaps only an almighty expert with such an identity could enjoy such a free and unfettered life. However, even with Emperor Huang Xuanyuan's identity and strength, didn't he have things to worry about? The juice of the dragon blood rejuvenation tree was bright red, and its smell was like the blood essence of a true dragon. That was why there were two words in its name, dragon blood. The so-called spring rejuvenation was that it was constantly absorbing and spitting out the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. The roots of the tree were spraying the spring rejuvenation spring all the time, which was a kind of spirit liquid that could keep a person's appearance and energy in a youthful state forever, and could even revive withered flowers and trees. If the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan really had nothing to worry about, why did he send Prince Changqin to the ghost realm? Their fleshly bodies were extremely strong. Wu Qi had an intuition that in terms of fleshly body alone, even if he combined his true body of heaven and earth, the dragon transformation script, and the dragon kill technique of a second-tier gold immortal, he was still not as strong as these two big fellows. The bronze chariot sped forward. Along the way, Wu Qi saw many ancient immortals, who were laughing and wandering among the mountains around Xianyuan Peak. They were either riding dragons, phoenixes, or other divine beasts and immortal birds as their mounts. They were drinking and having merry gatherings with their friends. They were definitely not as nervous as the immortals in the outside world. They were not like the immortals in the outside world who would draw their swords against each other for a piece of spirit stone. Carefully, Wu Qi approached the two muscular bull-headed men, who stood over 60 feet tall. Both of them looked very unusual. Their exposed skin had a metallic luster, and they did not look like they were made of flesh and blood. Their footsteps were sonorous and powerful, and when Wu Qi looked at their feet, he could tell that they were two huge ox hooves. Their feet looked as if they were made of metal, and when they bumped into the rocks, sparks flew out in all directions, making Wu Qi's scalp go numb. The general who led the patrol team gave them a glance and said with a smile, "Oh, they are Gnome Yunsheng and Green Leaf Immortal, good friends of the sacred emperor." Glancing at Wu Qi, who deliberately put on a stunned expression, the general laughed and patted Wu Qi on the shoulder. "Don't make such a fuss, lad. They are good friends who fought side by side with the sacred emperor. The ancient immortals are different from the immortals of today, very different. Gnome Yunsheng and Green Leaf Immortal have the right to enter and leave Liangzhu. Do you understand now?" Wrapped in a long cloud, the bronze chariot sped through the void, leaving a cloud tail that was miles long behind as it sped toward Xianyuan Peak. But what about the immortals of today? They paid more attention to polishing their fleshly bodies, nascent divinity, and strengthening themselves. They crazily plundered all natural energies and natural treasures to nourish themselves, and would do anything in pursuit of strength. They had embarked on a completely different path from the free and unfettered ancient immortals. After sighing with emotion for a while, Wu Qi shook his head. The immortals who occupied the outer heavenly realms now were once a branch of the ancient immortals. They were a pair of immortals, and their aura was simple and obscure. Clearly, they were ancient immortals who practiced ancient techniques. Ancient immortals were different from the cultivators and immortals of today. They focused more on comprehending the Tao of nature and borrowing the power of nature instead of accumulating their own strength. The cultivation base of this pair of ancient immortals was probably equivalent to that of today's 30th tier heaven immortals, but when they fought, it was likely that they would exert a power no weaker than that of ordinary primordial immortals. These gods came in all kinds of strange shapes, some with the body of a beast and the head of a human, some with the head of a beast and the body of a human, some with the body of a beast and the tail of a snake. Most of them were smiling as they mingled with the ancient immortals, drinking together, competing with each other in magic, or traveling together. Their carefree and happy appearance made Wu Qi very envious. Wu Qi exclaimed as he pointed at the man and the woman and cried out, "They are." Being able to enter and leave Liangzhu was equivalent to being an important minister of Diyu. Nong Yunsheng and Green Leaf Fairy were unknown in the myths and legends that Wu Qi knew, but they were actually comrades who fought side by side with the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. Wu Qi looked at the two of them with great fascination. How great would it be if he could obtain their cultivation techniques? In addition to these carefree ancient immortals, there were more ancient gods coming and going around Xianyuan Peak, and more than 30% of them were the bloodline of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan had become a sacred emperor with immeasurable virtues, and he was in love with women from various clans. All of the children he gave birth to were extraordinary, and each of them had obtained a portion of the power of the heavenly Tao. All of them were gods. Prince Changqin, for example, was a direct descendant of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. He was born with great divine abilities, but he was different from ordinary humans. Wu Qi broke out in a cold sweat. How could Xianyuan Peak be guarded by Qiyu? Amidst the rumbling of thunder, the bronze chariot sent Wu Qi straight to Xianyuan Peak. Outside one of the mountain gates of Xianyuan Peak, a few minotaurs clad in exquisite armors asked Wu Qi a few questions, and then 2 minotaurs led Wu Qi up Xianyuan Peak. Meanwhile, the patrol team that brought Wu Qi here turned around and continued their patrol. They could not easily climb up Xianyuan Peak if they had nothing to do. The dragon blood rejuvenation tree was so huge that it could secrete a considerable amount of spring water every day. Judging from the lustrous spring water that enveloped Xianyuan Peak and the dozens of mountains around it, it could be seen that the people living on the mountain did not show any signs of aging. One could also imagine how vigorous and plump the flowers and trees on the mountain were after being nourished by the spring water. Qiyu. The 2 burly men stared at Wu Qi and said, "We are from the Qiyu clan." "What's so strange about that?" "Ugh, why are you looking at me like that? You're asking for a beating." These ancient immortals did not care about their own cultivation base. What they paid attention to was the communication and integration with the heaven and earth, and the unfettered mind they pursued. Their own strength was very weak, and some ancient immortals had even barely reached the level of 36th tier heaven immortals, barely able to live forever. However, their minds had already become one with the heaven and earth, and every move they made was in accordance with the heavenly Tao. Once they let loose, their destructive power would be absolutely extraordinary. "May I ask how I should address you, seniors?" Wu Qi had a feeling that something was wrong. These 2 bull-headed men were too similar to a certain name in his memory. Chapter 778. Qiyu was not only the name of a man, but also the name of an ancient clan. The members of the Qiyu clan had the human body of a human and the head of a bull. They were born with bronze heads, iron foreheads, and iron bones. They were the race with the strongest fleshly bodies in the world, and their fighting prowess was amazing. They fed on sand and ores, and they could absorb the metal essence in the ores and fuse it into their bodies, forging their muscles and bones to be countless times tougher than metal. The strongest members of the Qiyu clan were not afraid of weapons, and they had the power to move mountains. They were the most fearsome warriors on the battlefield. In the past, one of the Qiyu clan's kings rebelled. He first defeated the Yan Emperor, Shenong, with a sneak attack, and then rose an army to fight with the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan, for control of Pangu continent. This battle made the Qiyu clan famous, but it also caused the Qiyu clan to be almost wiped out. Fortunately, Emperor Huang Xianyuan always had Qiyu people on duty. When Emperor Huang Xianyuan went out, the Qiyu people would be his personal guards and guards. Even when Qiyu rebelled, this group of Qiyu did not betray the Yellow Emperor, so they kept the Qiyu clan. After so many years of development, the Qiyu clan had grown stronger in Xuanyuan's territory, and they had regained some of their former glory. It was the first time Wu Qi saw the legendary Qiyu clan. He gave them a curiously measuring glance, and as a result, the straightforward Qiyu thought he was provoking them, and nearly gave him a good beating with their fists. Fortunately, Wu Qi had the ability to talk nonsense. Perhaps because these Qiyu had eaten too many metal ores, their skulls were extremely strong and thick, but their brains were not enough. They were overjoyed by his nonsense, and it did not take long for them to regard Wu Qi as a close brother. Laughing and joking, the two Qiyu led Wu Qi to the top of Xianyuan Peak. Along the way, they pointed out the people living on the dozens of mountains near and far, and told him about the checkpoints of various sizes along the way, where there were deities on duty. The two Qiyu were open-mouthed, so they immediately told Wu Qi the secrets of these deities, including the color of their underwear. Wu Qi was amazed by the story. How could an outsider hear such a secret? Thus, he found out from these two ox heads that although the great god Zhong and Li were tall, mighty, and had tyrannical combat strength, they were extremely henpecked. He also heard that God Long, who had helped the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan in the war against Qiyu, had just given birth to his 999th son. But, his youngest daughter was a rebellious girl, and she had fallen in love with a mortal on Panga continent. She was now in her human form and having a good time with him. Then, Emperor Huang Xianyuan was having a headache about the marriage of his youngest princess. It was said that the princess was brave and the only condition for her to choose her husband was to defeat her. However, since she was a child, she had beaten all the deities on Xianyuan Peak, and many mighty deities and generals had fled upon hearing her name. As a result, none of the descendants of the Yellow Emperor's civil and military officials of the right age dared to provoke the little princess. God knew where these two ox heads, who ate ores as their delicacies, got so much gossip. Along the way, Wu Qi listened to them talking about the secrets of the people on Xianyuan Peak. He listened with great interest, and his eyes shone brightly. Amidst the gossip, the two ox heads brought Wu Qi to the front of Xianyuan Palace on the top of Xianyuan Peak. It was obvious that the palace was designed by those ancient immortals. It was simple, dignified, and steady, but there was an air of elegance and magnificence in every detail. It was not as fancy as those immortals' buildings, but it was not as rigid as the buildings of Deyu. Wu Qi had always thought that the architects of Deyu were specialized in making bricks. No matter what palace it was, it looked like blocks of bricks from a distance. Xianyuan Palace was pale gold all over. The main hall was dozens of rows in front and back, and the main hall was towering and tall. Clouds and mist were full of spiritual qi, and huge stone pillars stood everywhere. Dragons such as true dragons, flood dragons, qi dragons, horned dragons, and winged dragons were entwined on them. Ancient strange trees such as Langxian trees were planted everywhere. Phoenixes were perched on the towering wudong trees, and Baifeng was perched on the fiery ironwood trees. Countless divine beasts and birds added a bit of mystery and magnificence to the palace. In the square in front of Xianyuan Palace, a large group of ancient immortals were gathered together, laughing and laughing. They were either playing chess, playing the zither, or setting up a huge stone table and waving their brushes and splashing ink. Naturally, there was a sense of nature among them. There were also some burly divine generals wandering around the square, mingling with these ancient immortals who had nothing to do. The huge square was a mess with people everywhere. There were even some gods who had deliberately kept their beast forms, running around in the crowd. The cries of various beasts and birds filled the ears. The square looked like a vegetable market on earth. No matter how one looked at it, it did not look like a place where a saint emperor of the human race lived. Two ox-headed men, carrying a stiff-faced Wuqi, pushed their way through the disorderly ancient immortals and divine generals, and came to the front gate of Xianyuan Palace. Two burly men, who were over 1,000 feet tall and had extremely well-developed muscles, were leaning lazily against the gate of the Xianyuan Palace. Each of them held a huge wine jar in their hands, gulping down mouthfuls of wine. Even from a long distance away, Wuqi could smell the strong aroma of wine coming from the jar. It was a truly supreme-grade wine, not something that the sour soup served in Diyu Palace could compare with. Wuqi could not help but curse the damned tradition of Diyu Palace in his mind. Even the subordinates of the Saint Emperor had been drinking this supreme-grade wine for a long time, so how could they still have the nerve to fool people with that old vinegar soup when serving banquets? The two burly men guarding the front gate of Xianyuan Palace had huge bodies, and compared to them, the two Qiyu, who stood 60 feet tall, looked like little mice. They did not even notice that someone was standing right in front of them. As for Wuqi, who was taller than an ordinary man, the two burly men did not take him seriously at all. They did not pay any attention to him at all. They only raised their wine jars and kept drinking, letting out thunderous burps from time to time. Under Wuqi's dumbfounded gaze, one of the ox-headed men pulled out a long-handled axe, flipped it over, and smashed the little toe of the burly man on the left with the back of the axe. A deafening boom rang out. Wuqi estimated that the force of the axe was about the same as the impact of the meteor that had destroyed Ningbo City many years ago. The face of the burly man, who was drinking wine to his heart's content, suddenly turned purplish red. He lifted the wine jar stiffly, and it took him the time to finish a pot of tea before he let out a miserable howl that shook the heaven and earth. Ayo! The burly man threw away the wine jar and jumped to his feet, holding his toes. He looked down angrily at the two ox-headed men and growled, "You bastards! I'm going to strip you naked and throw you into the dark cold pool at the back of the mountain to soak for 3 days and 3 nights. I'm going to skin all your hair." The ox-headed man with the axe raised his head valiantly and cried out, "There's an urgent military situation. It's a messenger sent by Crown Prince Changqin. Hurry up and go in to deliver the message. If you delay Crown Prince Changqin's important matter, your buttocks will blossom." The burly man, who felt a sharp pain in his toes and wished he could skin the two ox-headed men alive, was stunned for a moment. "Oh," he answered timidly, then ran into Xianyuan Palace to deliver the message. Wuqi stared blankly at the scene in front of him. Why did he feel that all the people on Xianyuan Peak were a little stupid? Of course, being simple-minded was a negative word. You could say that these people were simple, honest, kind, and pure. But when a person was too simple, honest, kind, and pure, what else could you be if you weren't simple-minded? The burly man, whose toe was kicked hard and probably had a slight bone fracture, ran into the palace to deliver the message, while the burly man, who was leaning against the palace gate and drinking with him, turned a blind eye to the burly man, raised his wine jar and poured wine into his stomach. Meanwhile, the two ox-heads, who were responsible for bringing Wuqi to Xianyuan Palace, leaped onto the wine jar held by the burly man, curled up their bodies, and hurriedly leaped into the jar to drink. The burly man stood 1,000 feet tall, and the wine jar in his hand was over 300 feet tall. When the 60 feet tall ox-headed men jumped into the jar, the wine jar was big enough for them to use as a swimming pool. The sound of wine being gulped kept ringing out. Wuqi scanned the wine jar with his divine sense and found that the two ox-headed men had actually finished all the wine in the jar in just 3 breaths of time. Then, they fell to the bottom of the jar with their bellies propped up and their eyes rolled back. Judging from their flushed faces, it seemed that they were very drunk. Inwardly, Wuqi gave them a thumbs up. They were the best, absolutely the best. How should he describe the people of Xianyuan Peak? In any case, Wuqi could not find the words to describe them. Before long, the burly man who ran into Xianyuan Palace just now came running out and cried out, "Prince Changqin's messenger, come in quickly. The sacred emperor wants to see you." "Ugh, where is he? Where is he? Where is the messenger?" The burly man's eyes went wide as he stared blankly into the distance. There was no one in front of him. Wu Qi, who stood over 8 feet tall, gave the burly man a helpless look. He reached out a hand, grabbed a finger-thick strand of leg hair on the burly man's leg, and pulled it out by the root. Feeling the pain, the burly man angrily lowered his head and glared at Wu Qi. Only then did he wake up with a start. Apparently, he had just seen Wu Qi. Wu Qi pointed a finger at his nose feebly and said with a wry smile, "I'm Tan Lang, Marquis of Deyu East Sea Province, and I'm Prince Changqin's messenger." The burly man blinked his eyes in surprise, then said with a frown, "Such a tiny messenger. How much effort did it take you to come here from the ghost realm? You must be exhausted from the journey, right? TSK, how could Prince Changqin be so cruel? How could a tiny man like you come all the way here?" Shaking his head, the burly man reached out and grabbed Wu Qi, then strode into Xianyuan Palace. Wu Qi was rendered speechless by the burly man. What the hell is this? Can't I be a messenger just because I'm small? That was what the burly man was thinking. The smaller a person is, the slower they run. How could those primordial experts feel when they saw that? The burly man brought Wu Qi and sprinted for a long time. Along the way, they passed by several dozens of lofty and solemn palaces, and saw countless strange and bizarre things. Finally, they came to a great hall sitting on top of a huge stone platform, shrouded in clouds, mist, and purple mist. The burly man put Wu Qi down, then led Wu Qi into the hall with a solemn expression. But, a casual step from the burly man was enough for Wu Qi to jog for dozens of steps. Wu Qi could not help but shake his head helplessly. The burly man's words did make sense when he could not use any divine abilities or magic. He hurriedly followed the burly man up the tall stone platform and walked into the majestic hall. The hall was large enough to accommodate tens of thousands of people of the burly man's size, so it was easy to tell how large the hall was. Some old men clad in black and white robes stood sparsely in the hall. At the far end of the hall was a throne, on which sat an old man with a benevolent face. He looked no different from any other old man, and was staring at Wu Qi with a gentle look in his eyes, devoid of any pressure or gleam. Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat, and he dropped to his knees almost instinctively. "Your humble subject, Wu Qi, pays respect to the sacred emperor." Chapter 779. Clad in an ordinary white linen shirt, a pair of boots made of fine grass, and a hairpin made of stone, this was the sacred emperor of the human race, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. There was no towering arrogance or awe-inspiring majesty. He simply sat there like an old man who had just been chatting with his neighbor, and there was no sign of a legendary mighty figure around him. In the face of such a yellow emperor, Wu Qi felt that he could not lie in front of him, so he simply told him his real name. The yellow emperor smiled. He gently patted the armrest of the throne and said, "Deyu is the new Marquis of East Sea Province. Isn't his name Tan Lang?" Wu Qi knelt down and bowed to the yellow emperor. "Wu Qi is my real name, and Tan Lang is my master's name," he said in a deep voice. "Oh, I see." The yellow emperor nodded and smiled, no longer asking about the matter. It was just a name, and it was not a big deal at all. Whether Wu Qi was called Tan Lang, Lu Xiaobai, or simply Zhang San, Li Si, Wang Matzi, they were all the same to the yellow emperor. They were all his descendants, and it was not a big deal. "What news does Changqin want you to bring me?" Spreading his arms, the yellow emperor smiled at Wu Qi and said, "I haven't heard from Changqin these days. I've sent many people to contact him, but the 3 Buddhas of the Buddhist League are guarding outside the Ghost Realm, cutting off the passage between Panga Continent and the Ghost Realm. No matter how hard I tried, they couldn't get through. How are you going to come back?" Wu Qi fished out a jade slip from under his sleeve and handed it to a spirited old man in white who stood next to the yellow emperor, Xianyuan. He was less than 3 feet tall and looked very spirited. The yellow emperor called him Feng Ho. Was he the man who created the compass chariot and broke Chiyo's fog formation when the yellow emperor was fighting Chiyu? It was said that he was the #1 artifact craftsman serving the Yellow Emperor. He had invented all kinds of strange things, and all kinds of powerful armaments manufactured by Great Yu's military court were based on his ingenious ideas. Feng Ho carefully took the jade slip and handed it to the Yellow Emperor. The Yellow Emperor narrowed his eyes and stroked the jade slip, then his expression changed abruptly. Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. A military intelligence that could make the Yellow Emperor change his expression like this was obviously not a good sign. Cold sweat oozed out of Wu Qi's back. A planet to settle the heroes of various races from the mortal world? Was it not the same as the myriad immortals planet where the people of the 6 dynasties lived? 372 such planets were actually destroyed. Who was the culprit? Emperor Huang Xianyuan lowered his head and pondered for a long time. He shook his head and sighed. I've been too occupied by the Black the Arch these days, so I've neglected this. Myriad Immortal Alliance has been wreaking havoc on Panga continent for years. De Yu's attention has been drawn there as well. I'm afraid they haven't found out about this. Emperor Huang Xianyuan snorted coldly, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Wu Qi suddenly felt an endless pressure sweeping through the huge palace like a blade. He felt a chill all over his body, as if invisible blades were stirring up his internal organs. The invisible pressure ignored Wu Qi's divine abilities and mystic arts and went straight into his body, causing his blood and energy to surge and making him feel very uncomfortable. Wu Qi could not help but be shocked. With just a thought from Emperor Huang Xianyuan, Wu Qi's cultivation base as a second-tier gold immortal was almost non-existent in front of him. What realm had his cultivation base actually reached? After a few cold laughs, Emperor Huang Xianyuan sighed and said, "That's not all. I've only suffered a little loss. But, the emissaries of the Green Emperor, the Black Emperor, and the White Emperor have been colluding with those old fogies in the past few years. What are they trying to do? A bunch of old fogies actually came to Empress Wa's palace, and those bald donkeys actually blocked the main entrance of Empress Wa's palace for a year? What are they trying to do?" Hearing this, Wu Qi's heart trembled. There was no need to mention Green Emperor, White Emperor, and the Black Emperor. They were all ancient mighty figures who had existed since the beginning of the primordial world, terrifying existences who had gone through countless tribulations without falling. They were much older than Emperor Huang Xianyuan. As for the old fogies mentioned by Emperor Huang Xianyuan, Wu Qi could not estimate what kind of people they were. To Wu Qi, Emperor Huang Xianyuan was already a legendary figure, and he really did not know what kind of people those so-called old fogies were. As for who the master of Empress Wa's palace was, there was no need to mention it. In the ancient times, many great sages worked together to create humans, and those great sages only created human bodies. The one who filled the human bodies with souls was the master of Empress Wa's palace, Goddess Nuwa. A few bald donkeys dared to block the main entrance of Empress Wa's palace for a year. Was it the current Lord Buddha of Buddhism, Amitabha? Did he have the courage to do so? If it was not Amitabha, then who was it? Could there be someone in the Buddhism League who was stronger and had a higher status than Amitabha? Staring blankly at Emperor Huang Xianyuan, Wu Qi heard many questions in his murmur. But, it was clear that no one was willing to explain them to Wu Qi. After all, he was only De Yu, a little marquis of East Sea province. Now that some people had begun to block the gate of Empress Wa Palace, did it mean that their plan was aimed at the human race? Wu Qi was deeply worried, but when he saw the 108 Kunwu swords floating around him, his mood suddenly became better. Kunwu swords were a famous divine artifact from the ancient times. How powerful were they exactly? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.